Tonight we're stepping into a world of silken gowns, golden hallways, and candlelit corridors that never truly go dark. You stand at the gates of Versailles, your shoes pinching, your hair powdered to perfection, and 1,000 eyes silently judging your every move. The air smells like rosewater and ambition. You're 15, Austrian, and now Queen of France. Or almost. The title is dazzling, but the reality? You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see how far this sleepy history club reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your carriage rattles to a stop in the gardens of Versailles. The air is thick with perfume and the low drone of gossip. You're Marie Antoinette of Austria, Archduchess, child bride, diplomatic pawn, and this is your new home. The year is 1770. You're here to marry the Dauphin, Louis Auguste, and unite two powerful empires. No pressure. The first thing that hits you is the size of it all. Versailles isn't just big, it's a world unto itself. Marble stretches in every direction. There are rooms just for music, rooms for tea, rooms for whispering behind fans, and pretending not to look at who's kissing whom behind the curtains. This place pulses with rituals, and now you're part of the performance. They take away everything you own at the border, your clothes, your letters, even your dog, because that's how the French do things. They quite literally strip you of your identity and remake you as one of their own. It's theatrical and kind of rude, but hey, you're the Dauphin now. Versailles is more than a palace. It's a political machine wrapped in velvet. Everything you do, wear, or say becomes a symbol. Your hairstyle might influence wheat prices. Your smile at dinner could be misread as an endorsement of war. And yes, your shoes are examined like sacred relics. You're basically living on a stage where the audience never blinks. The people you meet here aren't really people. They're roles in a grand opera. There's Madame du Barry, the king's official mistress, dripping in diamonds and disdain. There's your husband, Louis, awkward and bookish, far more interested in locks and keys than you. And then there's the rest of the court, a swirling mass of gossip-hungry courtiers who treat flattery as a blood sport. You learn quickly, emotions are currency, charm is armor, and real feelings, tuck those away, ideally under layers of silk, powder, and polite smiles. You dance, you dine, you play the harpsichord, all while wondering, is anyone here actually happy? Historically, Versailles in this era was the epicenter of French power and excess. Built by Louis XIV to centralize the nobility, it worked like a beautiful trap. If you were rich enough to be here, you were also too distracted to plot rebellion. Every crystal chandelier hummed with politics. But not everything is gold-dipped and rule-bound. If you sneak out early one morning, and you do, you'll catch the gardeners tending roses, not knowing their labor feeds an illusion. You'll hear rumors from the servants' quarters, where revolution is whispered between spoonfuls of stolen cream. And you'll see your own reflection in the glass of a gallery window and wonder, who exactly have you become? A quirky detail you might miss. Versailles had an official waker of the king and layer of the queen. That means someone's job, actual full-time job, was to help you wake up and later help you lie down. Not to sleep with you, mind you, just to oversee the process of going to bed and getting up. Talk about micromanagement. You try to find your place. You dance in masked balls, attend concerts in gilded theaters, and smile so much your jaw aches. Sometimes you sneak off to the Petit Trianon, a smaller palace gifted to you by your husband, just to breathe. It's not much, but it's the closest you've come to privacy since you arrived. Still, even behind its rose-covered trellises, you're never alone. There are always eyes. Maids arranging tulips just so, courtiers accidentally passing by. You're learning that freedom here is more costume than concept. Historians still argue whether young Marie truly understood the world she was walking into. Was she just a carefree teenager thrust into a snake pit? Or a savvy royal playing dumb to stay safe? One thing's clear. Versailles wasn't a palace you lived in. It was a palace that lived on you. There's one night that sticks in your memory. The ballroom is alight with 1,000 candles. Everyone twirls in shimmering pastels. You stand on the edge, sipping champagne, smiling as two dukes argue over the shape of your fan. For a moment, the music swells, and it almost feels magical. But beneath it all, a question lingers. What if none of this is real? You begin to crave something, something not gilded or rehearsed. Something that smells like hay, not lilac. Something that feels like quiet, like truth. You start dreaming of chickens, of garden dirt under your nails, of waking up without 3 people watching. And soon enough, those dreams take root in the most unexpected way. Unusual for Versailles, where nothing truly stirs before the powdered wigs are affixed and the chocolate is poured. But today, you lie in bed, staring at the embroidered canopy overhead, feeling more like a ghost than a queen. The pillow beneath you is soft, too soft, as if it might swallow your thoughts whole. You've been Marie Antoinette of France for months now, but it still doesn't feel like your name. You're Austrian. They never let you forget that. Even when they call you Madame la Dauphine, they say it with a sniff, like you still carry the scent of strudel and neutrality. Walking down the endless halls that morning, you feel the silence stretch. The court hasn't awakened yet, which means for once, no one is watching. Your silk slippers whisper against the parquet floors. Your fingertips trail along cold marble. You don't know where you're going exactly, just away from the eyes, the rules, the expectation that you'll birth a boy soon and make everyone's problems go away. Being Austrian in Versailles is like showing up at a French dinner party and bringing sausages instead of soufflé. You're not just foreign, you're too foreign. Your accent is mocked behind fans. Your clothes, slightly more flamboyant than French taste allows, get side eyes from women who've spent their lives perfecting the art of subtle judgment. You can't even laugh too loudly. Apparently, it's not very queenly. Historically, your Austrian identity was a huge problem. France and Austria had only recently patched things up after generations of conflict. Your marriage to Louis Auguste was political superglue, meant to stick 2 empires together. But not everyone likes glue, especially not when it comes with Austrian vowels and unfamiliar etiquette. You sit in the gardens watching the fountains murmur to themselves. A peacock rustles in a nearby hedge, probably judging your posture. Even the wildlife here seems snobbish. You nibble on a piece of brioche and try to smile. Everyone wants a smiling queen, but inside, you're aching. Here's a weird little fringe fact. Despite Versailles' constant need for appearances, Marie Antoinette reportedly disliked wearing corsets and once caused a fashion scandal by being painted in a muslin dress, basically 18th century pajamas. People lost their minds. She looks like a washerwoman, they cried. Others whispered, she looks like freedom. Even your marriage is under scrutiny. You and Louis barely talk, and when you do, it's mostly awkward nods and mild stammering. He's nice enough, but more interested in his tool collection than in, well, you. The pressure to produce an heir looms large, but nothing happens. And believe me, everyone notices. There are diagrams, gossip, official royal meetings about your bedroom behavior. I wish I were joking. Historians still argue whether Marie's outsider status made her defiant or simply lonely. Some say she leaned into extravagance to distract from the coldness around her. Others believe she was trying to mold Versailles into a place that felt even remotely human. After all, when you don't belong, your options are fake it, escape it, or burn it all down. You choose escape, not literal escape. Not yet. That'll come later. But emotional escape. You begin to surround yourself with a small circle of women who don't judge your laugh or your ideas. You stay up late playing cards, singing, telling jokes too crude for your official portraits. You loosen your bodices, both literally and metaphorically. Somewhere between the opera rehearsals and private garden strolls, you start to imagine something simpler. What if you didn't have to be Her Majesty all the time? What if you could just be? Not dressed like a painting, not watched by half of France, just you, maybe barefoot, maybe eating fresh strawberries in a quiet field, maybe holding a baby goat. That sounds ridiculous, but also kind of perfect. The idea takes root like ivy on stone. You start talking to architects, gardeners, even painters. You begin sketching little cottages in the margins of your letters. You dream not of castles, but of chimneys and chicken coops. You aren't sure what this place will be yet, but it's starting to form in your mind like mist rolling across a meadow. One day, during a stroll near the Petit Trianon, you turn to your advisor and say, what if we built a village? Not a real one, of course. Not with real hardship or real poverty. No, this village would be beautiful, perfect, controlled. You'd have milkmaids, but their hands would be clean. You'd have cows, but someone else would handle the smell. It would be a fantasy, sure, but it would be yours. Meanwhile, the court rolls its eyes. The Austrian is playing it peasant again, they say with a snort. But you don't care. The village idea, your village, becomes the one thing that feels real in a life full of performance. You visit farms. You study the designs of Normandy cottages. You pick paint colors that look aged but aren't. You even decide where the ducks will swim. It sounds absurd, but it thrills you. At Versailles, you're a symbol. At your village, maybe you'll be a person. But don't get too comfortable, because every step you take towards simplicity looks like extravagance to someone else. Seated upright in a stiff-backed chair, surrounded by ladies in towering wigs and satin gowns that crinkle like paper when they move. A servant approaches with a silver tray. No, it's not breakfast. It's a tiny cloth napkin. Another servant follows with a goblet. This continues, one item at a time, until you've been publicly dressed in full view of your court for what feels like hours. This is the morning levee, and you are the centerpiece of a very strange, very formalized play. Everything here at Versailles runs on ritual, and not just any ritual. Exhaustingly specific, hyper-rehearsed etiquette so complicated it probably needs a glossary. It's a twisted game of musical chairs with powdered faces. Who hands you your gloves matters. Who opens your bedroom window matters. Even who gets to watch you eat a pear is tied to rank and bloodlines. This is monarchy as theater. And guess what? You're the star who doesn't know her lines. You want to sneeze. You really do. But there's a protocol for that. Better hold it. These elaborate customs, developed during the reign of Louis XIV, were never just about manners. They were a power tool. Keep the nobles obsessed with getting close to the king or the queen, and they won't have time to plot rebellion or build armies. Instead, they'll fight over the honor of handing you your chemise. And they do. Furiously. Here's a real historical tidbit that'll make your modern brain twitch. There was an official hierarchy to who could help dress you. If a duchess entered the room mid-robe, the lady assisting had to immediately stop and hand over the garment, even if you were halfway into it. Imagine trying to button your blouse while nobles swap in like a bizarre fashion relay race. You sit still through it all, trying to keep your expression smooth, neutral, queenly. Inside, you're dying to shout, "Can I please just put on my own stockings?" Eventually, you're fully dressed, corset tight enough to prevent laughter, petticoats heavy as guilt, and a gown that could hide a corgi under each side pannier. Your face is powdered, lips tinted, and hair arranged so high it might technically enter a room before you do. You glide to breakfast, or rather, are escorted like a dignified mannequin, and you nibble at fruit while a row of onlookers watches in dead silence. You're not allowed to eat like a normal person. You must delicately peck, queen-like, even if you're starving. One wrong bite, and the rumor mill will spin into overtime. You try to talk to your husband, but he's buried in thoughts of lock mechanisms and clockwork. His responses are polite but brief, like someone answering a polite stranger on a long train ride. The intimacy you imagined in marriage? Nowhere in sight. And the longer you live in this house of mirrors, the more you realize you don't know how to be yourself anymore. Or if you're even allowed to try. Historians still argue whether Marie was simply too young and sheltered to adapt to court life, or whether she deliberately rejected it as an act of passive rebellion. One thing's clear, she never quite fit, and Versailles doesn't like misfits. What the public doesn't see is what happens when the doors finally close. You collapse into a chaise lounge, peel off your heels, and sigh like a person twice your age. Your maid brushes out your hair, which has held its shape too perfectly for too long. You feel itchy, not just physically, but in your spirit. You itch to move, to breathe, to go somewhere where your name isn't followed by expectations. Sometimes you dream of walking barefoot across a damp meadow, hair unpinned, face bare, and no one watching. That last part is the most important. One night you host a mass ball, an official one, all protocols followed. But after midnight you sneak out the back with your closest ladies in waiting and run barefoot, gasp, across the marble hallway to a private parlor. You laugh, drink too much, sing slightly off key. For 3 hours, you're not a queen, you're a girl. You cling to these tiny rebellions like lifelines. But even those moments get dissected by the court. She's frivolous. She's irresponsible. She's dangerous. You're starting to realize even your playfulness is political, and political in Versailles is rarely safe. There's this delightful yet oddly tragic fringe fact. At one point, Marie Antoinette had a mechanical harp installed that could play by itself, so she wouldn't have to practice in front of others. A musical ghost playing for a queen who just wanted to disappear. Kind of poetic, if a bit eerie. But Versailles doesn't allow ghosts to haunt in peace. As your popularity wanes, etiquette tightens. The public grows less enchanted. The nobles whisper louder. You walk through the palace, a confection of lace and jewels, and wonder, what if I could just take all of this off? And then you remember that idea you had. That strange, beautiful, absurd idea. A little village. A place where etiquette doesn't matter. Where you don't need 10 people to serve you jam. Where a laugh doesn't trigger a diplomatic incident. Where you can be no one. It starts to become more than an idea. You summon architects, gardeners. You walk the grounds with a glint in your eye that your ladies haven't seen before. You're not planning a war. You're planning an escape. Only this time, it's not away from France. It's as you step outside, your slippers sinking into the damp grass behind the Petit Trianon. You pull your shawl tighter and glance around. No courtiers in sight. No powdered wigs bobbing in your peripheral vision. Just you, a few chirping birds, and a plot of land that feels impossibly like promise. You pace slowly, already imagining the curve of the stream, the clapboard of a dairy house, maybe even a little stone bridge. The vision in your head is not Versailles. It is everything Versailles isn't. Intimate, quiet, free. You turn to your architect, Richard Meek. Yes, you've picked him yourself. And you say something like, I want it to look real, but also not too real. He doesn't blink. He's used to royal contradictions. You're asking for a fantasy disguised as simplicity, a curated version of peasant life where the butter is always fresh and the sheep are always photogenic. This is the first time you're not decorating a salon or selecting wallpaper for a ballroom. You're creating a world. Your world. The year is 1783, and your little dream project has a name now. The Hameau de la Reine. The Queen's Hamlet. It sounds charming, and it will be. But let's be clear. This isn't a village built out of hardship or necessity. This is Versailles cosplay. This is playing shepherdess with lace-trimmed aprons and porcelain milking stools. You are not becoming a farmer. You are building a stage where you can pretend to be one. Still, you're giddy, and giddiness has been in short supply lately. The Queen's Hamlet will include a dairy, a farmhouse, a mill, a bakery, a barn, and even a little tower beside an artificial lake. Think Disneyland meets the French countryside, minus the churros. Every detail is chosen with care. The walls are faux weathered. The roofs are designed to look thatched and rustic, but are secretly reinforced. The gardens grow real vegetables, sure, but only the pretty ones. Ugly cabbages? Not welcome. Here's a deliciously odd fringe fact. Marie even had cows imported from Switzerland because they were prettier than the local ones. She gave them names, brushed their coats, and ensured their stalls were cleaner than most Parisian hospitals. It was peasant life without the poverty, an 18th century influencer's dream. You walk the grounds during construction, correcting flower choices and window shutters. You want the whole place to feel effortless, which of course requires endless effort. You say things like, more lavender here, and the goat path should curve. Your ladies in waiting exchange amused glances, but you don't care. You're building an escape hatch. And it's not just for show. Once completed, you actually use the Hamlet. You dress in simple muslin dresses, loose, breathable, shockingly uncorsety, and wander barefoot through the grass. You milk cows, briefly. You gather eggs, carefully. You host picnics on gingham cloths while string quartets play softly nearby. It's theater, yes, but it's the most honest theater you've ever performed. Versailles rolls its eyes. The Queen plays at poverty while France starves, they mutter. And sure, there's some truth to that. Outside these palace walls, bread riots are simmering. Taxes are brutal. The economy is wobbling like a badly frosted cake. And here you are, role-playing little Bo Peep. But what they don't see is the desperation behind the fantasy, the hunger for control. You can't fix France. You can't even fix your marriage. But you can design a cottage where the roses bloom on schedule and the ducks don't talk back. Historians still debate the psychology of the Hamlet. Was it escapism, ego, a misunderstood artistic experiment? Some argue it was tone-deaf indulgence. Others see it as a quietly radical rejection of courtly suffocation. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. You didn't build it to mock the poor. You built it because you were drowning in wealth and needed to touch something soft, something real, or at least real enough. Because in Versailles, nothing is real. Not your laugh, not your gowns, not even your name. But in the Hamlet, when you run your fingers through warm goat's milk, when you press your bare toes into the earth, you feel something like relief, something like self. There's a moment that lingers in memory. One golden afternoon, you stand by the little lake, hair unpinned, apron dusted with flour. A breeze ruffles your skirt. Your friends, just a handful of women, no titles today, are sprawled on the grass, laughing over spilled cream. For once, there's no ceremony, no fans, no schedule, just the sun, the smell of hay, and a quiet joy. And maybe that moment costs more than it should. Maybe the silk muslin you wear is still woven with privilege. Maybe you're sipping imported lemonade under the guise of rustic charm. But it's still joy. And in your life, joy has been rare and fleeting. Still, whispers grow louder. The queen is building dollhouses while the country crumbles. Pamphlets mock you as Madame Deficit. They draw you with donkey ears and oversized pockets labeled tax money. You laugh sometimes, but the hurt sits in your chest like unbaked bread, dense, heavy, unrisen. You want to tell them it's not like that the Hamlet isn't about extravagance, it's about survival. But no one wants to hear that. No one listens to a queen in a milkmaid's dress. And somewhere, deep in the city, a different kind of village is forming. One with real fires, real hunger, real anger. You can't hear it yet. Not clearly, but soon it will roar. As gentle as it filters through the pear trees, warming your hands as you stroll between rows of tidy garden beds. A bird flutters down, lands on the edge of the stone well, then darts away with a chirp. You reach out and pluck a fig from a branch, soft, ripe, perfect. This is the Hamlet in full bloom, and for a moment all is calm. But beyond the gates, a storm is gathering. You don't hear it yet. How could you? Versailles is designed to muffle the sounds of unrest, like a pillow pressed against the ears of royalty. But down the road in Paris, murmurs are becoming grumbles. Grumbles becoming chants. Flour is scarce. The price of bread, once the measure of a good monarch, is soaring. Your subjects are angry, and their anger has a name now, yours. Still, here in your little village, it's always spring. You host tea in the orchard. You paint watercolor studies of ducklings. You throw costume parties where everyone dresses as shepherds or fishermen. Your friends, the Duchess de Polignac and the Princess de Lamballe, play along, happy to be far from the gossip and the gossipers. One of them asks, laughing, "Should we build a pretend jail too?" You laugh back, but the joke hangs in the air a little too long. Here's a quirky historical tidbit for you. Marie Antoinette had a functioning dairy in the Hamlet, where milk was served to guests in bowls made of Sèvres porcelain. The servants would pour it theatrically from gilded jugs, while the queen offered you goat cheese she didn't make and bread she didn't bake. Everything looked rustic, but it smelled faintly of Versailles. This was the contradiction of your Hamlet. You didn't want the pain of peasant life. You wanted the purity of it, or at least the image. Dirt without disease, labor without blisters, fresh air without fear. The fantasy of a simpler life held at arm's length by a velvet glove. And to you, it felt real enough. Historians still debate the Hamlet's impact. Was it an insult to the poor, a grotesque parody of their daily struggle? Or was it the desperate act of a woman suffocating under gold embroidery and public scorn, building something, anything that she could call her own? No consensus, just questions. Always questions. You don't stop to wonder what the people beyond the palace think. You've been taught not to. Since arriving in France at 14, you've been told your job is to charm, smile, bear children, and stay out of politics. You've done your best, sort of. But as you age, the layers of silk get heavier. So do the expectations. So does the blame. And now pamphlets are painting you as a foreign parasite, draining France's wealth for your own amusement. They show you stomping on wheat, sneering at peasants, wasting money on new gowns while babies starve. One even claims you bathe in champagne and burn diamonds for fun. Spoiler, you don't. You hear the rumors and wince, but you also roll your eyes. You think, surely no one believes this. But they do. They're hungry, and hunger makes people believe all kinds of things, especially when they need someone to blame. And let's be honest, the Hamlet doesn't help. Not really. It's not Versailles, no, but it's still expensive, still a showpiece. While thousands scrape together coins for a crust of bread, you're painting daisies onto imported teacups. You're wandering your artificial village like a tourist in a country you will never fully understand. And though your heart might be in the right place, your shoes are never muddy enough to prove it. There's a moment, small, forgettable, almost gentle, when it first truly hits you. You're watching a servant churn butter in the Hamlet's dairy house, and you catch her eye. She doesn't look away fast enough. In that split second, you see something there. Not hate, not fear, but distance. She sees you, but not as one of them. Not even close. You smile. She curtsies. The moment passes, but it lingers. You begin to notice other things. A gardener who stops singing when you approach. A maid who flinches when she drops a spoon. A pastry boy who won't make eye contact when delivering your tarts. It's subtle, but it's spreading. A tension in the air, like a violin string pulled just a little too tight. And then news trickles in. Paris is restless. Bread lines grow longer. There are reports of riots. In taverns and public squares, your name is spoken like a curse. People claim you said, "Let them eat cake," though you never did. Still, the myth sticks better than the truth ever could. You retreat deeper into the Hamlet, as if a duck pond and some painted shutters could hold back revolution. They won't. One rainy morning, a courtier delivers news in hushed tones. A mob has stormed a bakery in the faubourg. A woman was trampled. The guards were pelted with stones. No one died yet, but the king's advisors are worried. You fold your hands in your lap, the silk of your gown wrinkling like paper. You want to say something wise, something queenly. Instead, you murmur, "I hope the children were safe." It sounds weak even to your own ears. You wander back to the Hamlet that afternoon, hoping the scent of warm milk and lilacs will clear your mind. The buildings are still beautiful, still clean, still empty of the kind of life that grows under pressure. You pick up a basket and head to the chicken coop. The hens cluck around you, oblivious. You reach into the straw for an egg and pause. Your fingers brush something cold. Metal. You pull out a tiny pin, a shard of broken jewelry maybe, dropped by a visitor. It sparkles, but it's sharp. It feels symbolic. The Hamlet remains your sanctuary, but now it whispers to you, not in French, not in Austrian, just in echoes of a world that's starting to crack. And the cracks, they're headed your way. Though the skies are blue. It's not the weather, it's the sound of something approaching. Hooves on stone, boots in gravel, that kind of thunder, the kind that travels in waves, not clouds. October 5th, 1789. You hear it first in whispers, then in hurried footsteps, then in the panic of servants slamming doors and messengers rushing through hallways, and finally in the words you never thought you'd hear. They're coming. You're in Versailles. Not the Hamlet this time, not in linen or muslin. You're back in full court armor, powder, corset, diamonds, obligations. But none of it matters now. Thousands of women, market women, mothers, daughters, widows are marching towards you. They started in Paris, furious over the price of bread. They brought pitchforks, kitchen knives, and muskets. Some brought children on their hips. Some have never held a weapon in their life. But hunger sharpens everything, even fear. The march is not just about food anymore. It's about justice. It's about power. It's about you. You try to stay calm. You remind yourself of your breeding, your posture, your training. But inside, your pulse skips. Because this is not a court scandal you can outlast with a smile or a new hairstyle. This is revolution, walking straight toward your front gate, and it has dirt under its nails. As they arrive, the air thickens with smoke and sweat and slogans. The women gather in the palace courtyard. They shout. They demand the king speak. Some of them demand your head. Not symbolically, literally. Your ladies in waiting weep. One faints. Another offers to stand in your place if the worst happens. You don't know whether to thank her or scream. Mainstream fact. This was the Women's March on Versailles, a pivotal moment in the French Revolution. Over 7,000 women, armed and unrelenting, marched to demand bread and political reform. They didn't come for a tour. As chaos unfolds outside, you retreat to your private chambers. You press your palms against the window and see torches. You hear chanting, "A Paris! A Paris! To Paris!" They want you to come with them. The king hesitates, then agrees. This isn't just a visit. This is a surrender. You don't get to say goodbye to the Hamlet. No last walk through the orchard. No farewell to the soft, unblemished cows or the painted shutters. You leave it the way someone leaves behind a childhood toy, abruptly, without closure. You ride toward Paris in a slow, dreadful procession. The crowd surrounds your carriage, singing, laughing, jeering. Some wave loaves of bread like trophies. Others drag cannon behind them, trophies of their own. They call you names. They shout insults in your face. You sit stiffly, not daring to look too long in any direction. You clutch your son's hand. His fingers are sticky with fear. Fringe fact, a few revolutionaries that day reportedly carried pikes topped with heads, real ones, of guards slain during the scuffle at Versailles. One even tried to scale your carriage with a severed head in hand, just to show it to you. That one, thankfully, was pulled away. But the image lingers like a fever dream. You arrive at the Tuileries Palace. It's not Versailles. It's not the Hamlet. It's cold, gray, and guarded. The drapes are threadbare. The mirrors cracked. The halls echo like an abandoned theater. Here, you are not queen by right. You are queen by proximity. A figurehead, a prisoner with silk privileges. You try to continue your routines. You host quiet dinners. You tend to your children. You write letters, long and careful. But every day feels a little shorter, the walls a little closer. Historians still argue whether your decisions in these early revolutionary years were strategic or naive. Some say you schemed constantly, sending secret letters, making shadowy alliances, plotting escape. Others say you were frozen in shock, clinging to etiquette as the world turned to fire. Maybe both are true. You receive news from Versailles occasionally. Your gardens have gone wild, the flowers unkempt, the animals dispersed. The Hamlet is silent, empty. No one milks the goats anymore. You think about it often. Not the pageantry, not the perfect windows or imported cows, but the feeling. The warmth of a summer morning, the smell of bread baking in the air, the idea that you had made something beautiful, something separate, but you couldn't separate it forever. Not from the world, not from history. Your name is still cursed in the streets. The phrase, "let them eat cake," follows you like a mosquito, small but insistent. You didn't say it. You know you didn't. But it doesn't matter. A lie told with enough hunger becomes truth. One evening, you walk alone in the palace garden, the moon pale above you. You stop beneath the tree and try to imagine the Hamlet here, its quiet paths, its bleating sheep. But nothing grows in this soil except resentment, a rustle behind you, a guard coughs. You're not even alone in your own imagination anymore. That night, your daughter asks when you'll go back to Versailles. You say soon, but you know it's a lie. Like so many things now. The court is unraveling. Friends are disappearing. Some flee the country. Some are dragged to prison. Some to the guillotine. You keep your back straight. You keep your voice steady. You keep wearing blue silk, even when black might be more appropriate. But inside, the storm that started in October still rolls forward. The Hamlet was your refuge, but there's no refuge left. Dawn. Not because you want to, but because the city never sleeps anymore. There are shouts in the street, the clatter of hooves. Somewhere, a bottle breaks. Even from your high window, the sound of Paris creeps in like fog. It seeps under the doors, through the curtains, and into your dreams. You blink toward the pale ceiling of the Tuileries Palace and think, not for the first time, this place is haunted, but not by ghosts, by history, by consequences, by the thick, humid breath of revolution pressed right against your neck. You're not the only one awake. A maid moves quietly through the room, arranging your slippers. She no longer looks you in the eye. That used to bother you. Now you're not sure you could meet her gaze anyway. The room smells like old velvet and faint sweat, nothing like the Hamlet. There it smelled like lavender and fresh milk, remember? And silence. Oh, the silence. The real kind. Not just the absence of noise, but the presence of peace. Here, every silence is a waiting room for disaster. It's 1790 now. The monarchy is still standing, technically, but you can feel the floor tilting under your feet. The nobles have scattered. Some went to Germany, others to London, some to the guillotine. You're stuck in the middle of the chessboard, not quite queen, not yet captured. The people chant your name in the streets, not with adoration, but accusation. Madam Devich, enemy of the nation. You try to ignore them. Sometimes you pull the curtains closed and pretend the world outside is just a play. But deep down, you know the show has already moved on without you. Mainstream historical fact. In 1790, the National Assembly continued pushing through revolutionary reforms, abolishing noble privileges, nationalizing church lands, and steadily weakening the monarchy. The king, your husband, had lost almost all real power. And you were a symbol now, a lightning rod, a mask onto which people painted their fury. And let's not forget the fringe tidbit. Rumors began circulating that you had built secret passageways under the Tuileries to escape if things got bad. There's no solid proof, of course, but the belief was strong enough that revolutionaries searched the palace more than once. They never found a secret tunnel, just dusty cellars and your jewelry tucked in a box under a floorboard. You begin writing letters again, long ones, secret ones, to your family in Austria, to loyal nobles in hiding. You use invisible ink. You choose your words carefully, knowing any slip could end in disaster. You send them with trusted messengers. At least, you hope they're trustworthy. Historians still argue whether your correspondence actually had any influence. Some say you coordinated with foreign powers to crush the revolution. Others say you were just grasping for help like a drowning woman grabs at shadows. Either way, your letters will eventually be discovered, and they'll be used as proof. Proof that the people were right to hate you. Your son gets sick. Nothing serious, just a fever. But still, you panic. Because even illness feels political now. If the boy coughs too hard, someone might accuse you of trying to kill a future revolutionary. Your daughter clings to your skirts more than she used to. She doesn't ask questions anymore, just watches you with wide, unblinking eyes. You miss the Hamlet. You miss pretending. But even that fantasy is tarnished now. Word has reached you. The Hamlet has been looted, the dairy overturned, the orchard stomped flat, the windows smashed. The villagers, those few you actually employed, were driven off or absorbed into the crowd. The goats, gone. The ducks, eaten, probably. Nothing is sacred when people are hungry enough. One report claimed they held a mock execution in the Hamlet's main house, using a scarecrow dressed in silk and labeled the Shepherdess Queen. You laugh when you hear it. Not because it's funny, but because you finally realized your worst critics are also your most imaginative. You think about writing a will. You don't. But you start hiding small things, lockets, keepsakes, a ring your mother gave you when you left Vienna. You don't know who you're saving them for. Your daughter, maybe. Or just for the idea that someone, someday, might care. At court, the mood has turned funereal. People speak in whispers. Some won't speak to you at all. Not out of rudeness, but fear. Association with the queen is dangerous now, like handling live explosives with lace gloves. Even the palace guards are different, more citizen than soldier. They wear cockades and give you thin smiles. You're not sure which is worse, hatred or polite indifference. One night, you attend a public banquet meant to reassure the people. The plan is to show unity, civility. You wear your best gown, smile when expected, raise your glass when prompted. But when the music starts, it all feels grotesque, like dancing at your own trial. The rumors explode afterward, that you toasted the king's return to power, that you trampled the revolutionary flag, that you spat on the poor. None of it true, but the people believe it anyway. Paper is cheap, lies are loud. You stop trying to defend yourself, no point. You're no longer seen as a person, just a placeholder for everything the revolution hates. Your accent, your gowns, your past, they've become indictments. And slowly, you feel yourself shrinking. You used to walk with your head high. Now, you hunch just slightly, as if ducking invisible arrows. You used to give commands. Now, you ask questions in soft tones, hoping no one hears the tremble underneath. And yet you still wear silk. You still curl your hair. You still sign your name with a flourish. Some call it arrogance. Others call it bravery. Maybe it's just habit. Maybe it's all you have left. One morning, a servant knocks and says, "There's a delegation outside." You nod, already numb. You know what they want. They always want something. Bread, heads, change. But this time, they want everything. The days ahead won't be lived, they'll be survived. Asking what time it is. Time, after all, has stopped caring about you. It used to obey you, remember? You snapped your fingers and dinner began. You raised your fan and the orchestra paused. But now, time rushes past, indifferent, mocking. Paris marches on, and you're just trying not to slip under its boots. It's 1791, and the walls of the Tuileries feel closer every morning. You wake with a knot in your stomach, an ache in your teeth. You don't even know what day it is, only that it's another one where you're not allowed to walk alone. Another day where the people outside are shouting about your execution before breakfast. And it hits you. You can't stay here. Not another month, not another week, not another sunrise. You need to escape, not just for you, for your children, for the king, for what's left of the world you once understood. You still believe, naively maybe, that if you can just reach Austria, your brother will protect you, that armies will rise, that the tide will turn, that all of this mess, this nightmare, this crawling dread can be reversed. So you start planning. Mainstream historical fact, the royal family's attempted escape, known as the Flight to Varennes, was one of the defining disasters of the revolution. The plan was simple on paper. Disguise yourselves. Leave Paris quietly at night. Rendezvous with loyal soldiers outside the city. Cross the border to safety. But in practice, it was a slow-motion train wreck. You choose the disguise of a governess, the king, a valet, the children bundled like anyone else's children, your entourage trimmed down to a few trusted faces. You travel in a large, ordinary carriage, too large in hindsight, too slow, too conspicuous. And here's the quirky tidbit. You insisted on bringing an absurd amount of luggage. Trunks filled with dresses, shoes, toiletries. One report says you even packed a silver dinner service, the kind of thing that screams, "Hello, we are definitely not fleeing revolutionaries. We are just a very well-dressed peasant family out for a weekend jaunt." It's the kind of detail that might be funny if it didn't end so badly. You leave on the night of June 20th, 1791. The streets are quiet. The children sleep. You wear plain clothes, but your hands betray you. Too soft, too pale. A lady's hands. You try to hide them under gloves, but nothing can hide who you are. Not really. You pass through the city, past bakeries shuttered for the night, past guards too tired or too loyal to ask questions. You think you've made it. That soon, the roads will open, the sun will rise, and you'll be on your way to safety. But somewhere near Varennes, everything falls apart. A postmaster, sharp-eyed and suspicious, recognizes the king's face, not because of the disguise, but because it was on every coin in France. He sounds the alarm. The town turns into a net. Soldiers appear. The carriage is stopped. You're asked questions. Too many. Too fast. You hesitate. And then it's over. You're not dragged back. That would almost be better. No, you're escorted ceremoniously, ironically, back to Paris under heavy guard, with thousands of jeering spectators lining the roads. Some throw stones. Some just stare. You ride in silence, your face stiff with exhaustion and shame. Historians still argue whether you pushed the king into fleeing or whether he made the decision himself. You were certainly the more determined of the two. You believed escape was not only possible, but necessary. That France would never accept the monarchy again unless it returned with strength behind it. You weren't wrong. You were just unlucky. When you return to the Tuileries, the lock clicks a little louder behind you. The doors close with more finality. You're no longer royalty in hiding. You're royalty exposed. You've tried to flee your own people. And now they'll never forget it. You hear a new insult in the streets, the Austrian she-wolf. Not elegant, but it sticks. In private, you're broken. Not crying, not screaming, just hollow. You stop writing letters. You stop attending functions. You take long walks in rooms you used to avoid, touching the wallpaper as if to remind yourself, this is real, this is happening. The Hamlet, now so far away, feels like a different lifetime. You imagine it untouched even though you know better. In your mind, the flowers are still blooming. The chickens still peck at dust. You can almost smell the honeyed air of your fake village. But then your cell door opens and reality floods in. That's right, cell door. Because not long after your failed escape, the monarchy is officially suspended. You're no longer living in a palace. You're living in a prison with drapes. The guards change. The rules tighten. You're watched constantly. Notes are confiscated. Visitors are screened. The king barely speaks. Your children grow pale. Your daughter begins to read faces the way she once read fairy tales, looking for danger in every expression. And yet, through it all, you hold on to your posture, your powder, your manners. It's absurd, really, the way you insist on pouring tea just so, the way you demand proper table settings, the way you bow, even when there's no one left to impress. But maybe it's not absurd. Maybe it's the last thread tying you to the woman you used to be. One night you dream of the Hamlet again. You're barefoot, running through wet grass. The air is warm. The cows are back. The cottages glow with candlelight. And there, on the little bridge, is a girl who looks like you, only younger, freer. She turns and smiles. You wake up crying. You don't even try to hide it anymore. Or maybe you do, but the dreams slide away the moment you open your eyes, like dew off silk. The reality you're waking into is already enough of a hallucination, because now the monarchy is dead in everything but name, and you, Marie Antoinette, are the ghost still haunting its shattered halls. It's early 1792. The revolution has grown bolder, sharper, and angrier. You can feel it in the way your food arrives cold or not at all, in the way the guards no longer hide their smirks, in the silence after you speak to your husband and he doesn't reply. Louis has drifted inward, deeper into some quiet cavern in his mind. You're not sure he'll ever come back. The children still cling to routine. Your daughter braids her doll's hair. Your son repeats his lessons like a charm against chaos, but the walls are closing in, and soon they will collapse altogether. The storm is building. You hear it in every footstep on the marble floors, in the whispers that echo down the corridors. The people are not satisfied. They want more than your resignation. They want your humiliation, your punishment, your head if they can get it, and they will. Mainstream historical fact: on August 10, 1792, the Tuileries Palace was stormed by a revolutionary mob. It was chaos, gunfire, screams, bodies falling from balconies. The Swiss guards loyal to the king were slaughtered. Blood ran down the stairs like wine at a cursed feast. You were there. You lived it. Sort of. Because when the fighting began, you and the royal family fled through a secret passage to the National Assembly. Imagine that, escaping into the arms of the people who wanted you gone, because the other option was being torn apart on a staircase. You sat in a box, yes, a literal wooden box, while the assembly debated your fate. It smelled like dust and sweat and something metallic. The air was tight. Your son whimpered. Your hands trembled, but you kept them still. One of the ministers stared at you like you were a beetle under glass. From that moment, you were no longer even pretending to rule. The monarchy was officially abolished. France declared itself a republic. You weren't a queen. You weren't even a citizen. You were just Widow Capet, a name stripped of rank, dignity, and history. Here's the quirky tidbit. During the chaos, revolutionaries broke into your private apartments and reportedly found, along with smashed furniture and scattered jewels, a lock of your hair carefully tied with ribbon, labeled "For my daughter's wedding day." The same daughter now slept beside you in a prison cell. The wedding day? Unlikely. You were transferred to the Temple prison, once a medieval fortress, now your new reality. Cold stone, iron bars, zero privacy. Your world shrunk to a few damp rooms in a courtyard with patchy grass. The luxury that once wrapped your life like a silk cocoon had vanished. Gone were the scented baths, the music, the powdered wigs. You cut your own meat now. You made your own bed. You braided your daughter's hair by the light of a single candle. You were, at long last, living like one of your fictional peasants. Funny, isn't it? You used to play at being a shepherdess. Now you were a prisoner, pretending not to be afraid. Historians still argue whether you showed true courage in prison or whether your composure was a performance, a habit left over from court life. Did you keep your dignity because of inner strength or because you didn't know how else to exist? It doesn't really matter. You still walked with your head up, still greeted the guards by name even when they spat yours like a curse, still whispered bedtime stories to your children, though your voice cracked and the stories had no endings. You thought the Hamlet would protect you once, that the illusion of simplicity could buy you peace, but the people didn't want illusions. They wanted someone to blame, and you were right there, wrapped in silks, sipping milk from porcelain bowls. Now you drank water from a dented tin cup. And still, somehow, they hated you more. Letters stopped arriving. News came only in pieces, rumors, mostly. You heard about your friends fleeing, some dying. You heard that foreign armies were advancing, that your brother might intervene, that Paris was bracing for siege. Each new whisper fed a small ember of hope, but it never grew. One evening your son asked, "Are we going home soon?" And you had to answer, "We are home, my love." Because you were. This was it. These walls, this chill, this time-stained mattress, this room that still smelled faintly of burnt bread. That night, you heard singing outside, men with rough voices, too many glasses of cheap wine deep, singing songs about your death. They rhymed Antoinette with bayonet, clever in a tragic way. And still, you didn't cry. But you did remember. You remembered the Hamlet, the cows, the warm milk, the feeling of lace against your neck, the laughter of the other women playing shepherdess. You remembered pretending you were one of them, just a girl in a village, without politics, without enemies, without fate breathing down her neck. You remembered, and for a moment, you hated her. You hated that girl who thought a fake village could protect her from a real revolution. But then you forgave her too, because what else could she do? What else can you do now? You light a candle, you fold a towel, you kiss your daughter's forehead. You pray in silence, not for rescue, but for resilience. You have learned that queens don't die on thrones. They die in cold beds, holding the hands of their children, waiting for a knock at the door that finally comes first. Not with swords or shackles, though honestly, would that have felt any less brutal? No, they come with papers, orders, a statement from the Committee of Public Safety. They say it in the flattest voice possible, like this is just another Tuesday. The boy is to be separated from his mother and placed under the supervision of a tutor loyal to the Republic. You try to protest. Not loudly. That doesn't work anymore, but with the kind of quiet fury only a mother can muster. You cling to his arm. He clings back, his little fingers digging into your sleeve, his eyes wide and wet and shaking. But they pull him anyway. You listen to his footsteps as they recede, down the hall, around the corner, then gone. You don't scream, you just sit, and the silence that follows is somehow louder than all the mobs you've ever faced. Mainstream historical fact. Louis Charles, your 8-year-old son, was taken from you in July 1793. He was placed under the care of Antoine Simon, a shoemaker turned jailer. The plan? Re-educate the Dauphin, strip him of his royal brainwashing, turn him into a good little revolutionary. But the reality was far darker. Simon, possibly more cruel than even the revolution demanded, kept the boy in isolation. Reports say Louis Charles was beaten, starved, and psychologically tormented. He was forced to denounce you, to swear he'd seen things no child should even know about. They claimed he admitted to, let's not even repeat the accusations. They weren't true. Everyone knew that. But it didn't matter, because truth had left the room a long time ago. Your daughter, Marie-Thérèse, stayed with you, silent and wide-eyed. She asked fewer questions now. She wrote in the margins of old scraps of paper, anything to anchor herself. You taught her to hide her thoughts, to speak only when asked, to bow her head, even when it burned with anger. You were raising her for a future neither of you believed in anymore. And yet, you kept brushing her hair, morning and night, the same number of strokes, the same little rhyme. Because rituals are a kind of rebellion, too. You still remember how the walls in your Hamlet never closed in, how the cottage windows let in soft air and birdsong, how your children giggled at the pigs and sheep. That life had been curated, artificial, but at least it had been yours. Here's your quirky tidbit. While imprisoned, you asked for rose water and a ribbon, just one, to comb your daughter's hair and tie it properly. You were denied. Ribbon apparently was too royal, too dangerous, a political threat in silk form. Historians still argue whether that request was a sign of hopeless vanity or the last threat of your defiance. Was it ridiculous? Maybe. But it also says something important. You were still trying to mother your child, to preserve the tiniest ember of normal. By this point, the public hated you more than they hated the king. You were foreign, female, fancy, a trinity of unforgivable sins in revolutionary France. And now they were ready to finish the job. On August 1st, 1793, the guards came again. But this time, they said your name. You stood. You smoothed your skirt. You whispered something to your daughter, words no one recorded. Maybe it was, be strong. Maybe it was, forgive them. Or maybe it was nothing heroic at all. Maybe just, I love you, in a cracked voice. They led you down the stairs, through the courtyard, through the gate. You expected noise, crowds, fury. But instead, Paris was strangely quiet, which was almost worse. They took you to the conciergerie, a fortress on the banks of the Seine turned into a holding pen for the condemned. You were prisoner no. 280, assigned a cell with a single straw mattress and a stool, a queen now reduced to inventory. They called it la salle des femmes, the women's cell block. Your companions? Prostitutes, thieves, and a few unlucky aristocrats. Some cried. Some laughed. Some had already given up and were only waiting for the blade. You sat in silence, listening. Every day they came with a list. Every day someone was taken away, and every night you were still there. At first, you thought it meant something. Then you realized it didn't. One morning, you looked in a broken piece of mirror and barely recognized yourself. The white hair, the hollow cheeks, the way your collarbone jutted like a blade. You were 47 going on 100, and yet you still walked tall. You still spoke with precision. You still corrected a guard's grammar once out of habit. He didn't like that. Your nickname on the cell block became La Veuve, the widow. Even the other prisoners, whose lives were upside down in every possible way, looked at you with a kind of reverent dread. They knew. You did too. The Hamlet floats back to you like a half-sunken memory. You picture the goats, the rough linen, the creaky footbridge. You imagine a day there, just one more. You'd sit on the grass, feed the hens, laugh at nothing in particular. Your children would splash in the stream, unafraid, unashamed. You'd be barefoot. You'd be free. But this isn't a Hamlet dream. This is a stone room that smells like mildew and something sour. This is a scratchy shift with a hem too short. This is a prison where you don't even get a pillow. Still, you wake, you sit, you breathe. That's all that's left to do. Your final trial is scheduled. You're not told exactly when, but you've already chosen your last dress. It's plain. White, linen, fitting in a way. A parody of the shepherdess you once pretended to be. Only this time, there's no pretend. This time, it's not a game. Before dawn, there's no ceremony, no trumpets, just the scrape of a key, the creak of your cell door, and the flat voice of a guard. It's time. You stand without help. No trembling, no dramatics. Just the rustle of linen as you straighten your dress, the white one. The one you've saved. The one you chose not because it flatters, but because it speaks. You'll meet the end not as a queen, but as a widow, as a mother, as a woman in white. Stark, bare, undeniable. The conciergerie hallway smells like old water and damp wood. It's quiet, which is the worst part. Silence wraps around you like a rope. At least when they're shouting, you can pretend you're still part of the world. You're led to a narrow wooden cart, the tumbrel, open to the air, with high slatted sides. You climb in with the help of a guard who flinches when you touch him, as if royalty might still stain. It's October 16th, 1793. You sit on a rough bench, hands bound behind you, your hair chopped short. Not for fashion, no. The executioner cut it so the blade wouldn't snag. Practical, really. Nothing personal. Mainstream historical fact. The cart rolls slowly through Paris for over an hour, from the conciergerie to the Place de la Révolution. People line the streets, not like they did for your wedding. Not like Versailles garden parties. These faces are harder, hollower. Some cheer, some spit. Some just watch with unreadable eyes. You keep your chin lifted. Always that. Someone throws a cabbage. It misses. Someone else shouts, "She's still proud!" And you think, "Yes, you bet I am." Here's your quirky tidbit. As you rode to the scaffold, you reportedly apologized to the executioner when you stepped on his foot by accident. "Pardon me, sir, I did not do it on purpose." A small gesture, but one that somehow made its way into legend. The queen, in her last moment, still remembered her manners. When you reach the square, the sky is overcast, the kind of gray that presses on your shoulders like guilt. The guillotine looms in the middle, taller than you imagined. Functional, not imposing. Just there, like a bad idea someone never got around to canceling. The crowd pulses with that strange hunger they always bring to public deaths. It's not hatred exactly, it's boredom too. They want a show, and you're it. Historians still argue whether you showed true courage in your final moments or simply resignation. Did you walk to the scaffold with dignity because you accepted your fate, or because you refused to let them see you beg? You know the answer, of course, but they never asked you. You climb the steps. There are 13 of them. You count. It's something to do. When you reach the top, the wind lifts your dress slightly. You don't pull it down. Modesty feels beside the point. The executioner arranges you. Hands here, knees there. You kneel, but awkwardly. It's not something queens are taught. You fumble, try again. Your breath catches, but you don't cry. Then your neck touches the wood. Cold. Your heartbeat pounds against the silence. Even the crowd is still. Then, no more. But wait, because this isn't just about your death. This isn't the end of the story. Not even close. Because the Hamlet still stands, somewhere beyond the city, beyond the screams and steel and stones, your little village still breathes. It's absurd, isn't it? Your fantasy, a place of chickens and cottages, of painted milkmaids and ceramic jugs, is outliving you. The stage set survives while the star takes her final bow. And yet, maybe that's fitting, because the Hamlet was never about escape. Not really. It was about control, comfort, make-believe, something you could hold on to in a world you couldn't shape. And now, that world has shaped you right back into history, into myth, into a cautionary tale. But let's rewind just for a moment. Let's walk back to the Hamlet one last time. Let's step inside the cottage again, smell the dried lavender hanging from the ceiling beams, hear the cluck of hens, the distant ripple of the pond. Let's sit on the bench by the stream where your children once dangled their feet, laughing as the fish darted by. Let's imagine what might have been, if the people had forgiven you, or if the tide had turned, or if you'd said the right thing at the right time. Historians still argue about that too, whether there was any moment you could have changed your fate, whether France was always headed this way, or whether you helped steer it. No one agrees, and now it hardly matters. But in that village, your village, the world once felt quiet. It was fake, yes, a theater, a fantasy, but it was yours. And maybe, just maybe, that's all any of us ever want. A corner of the world where the noise stops, where the roles fall away, where you can just be. Your head is gone now. The body falls limp, the crowd erupts and then moves on. Another performance ends, but the Hamlet remains. Maybe someone walks through it today, not knowing you ever lived there. Maybe they feed the goats, sit in the garden, sip something sweet from a tiny porcelain cup. Maybe they smile. And maybe, just maybe, that's your final victory. So what happens after you die? Turns out not much, at least not immediately. Your head is held up for the crowd, standard procedure, before being tossed unceremoniously into a wooden coffin alongside your body. No flowers, no hymns, just a sharp thunk and the sound of footsteps walking away. You're buried in a mass grave at the Madeleine Cemetery, your name left off the ledger, dust to dust, anonymity to anonymity. But outside the grave, the noise continues. Paris doesn't stop just because a queen dies. People still bake bread, men's shirts whisper gossip behind their hands. The city keeps turning, as if you'd never mattered, and maybe for many, you didn't. Mainstream historical fact: in the wake of your death, your image was weaponized in every direction. Royalists turned you into a martyr, a tragic heroine cut down by chaos. Revolutionaries painted you as a cautionary tale, proof of the rot they'd excised. And artists? They couldn't stop drawing you. You were reborn in oils and sketches, made thinner, softer, more sorrowful than you ever were. Your ghost wore a crown of melancholy. The irony? In life, they said you were too frivolous, too shallow, too fond of silks and strawberries. In death, they gave you depth. Go figure. And yet somewhere the Hamlet still hums with life. Not real peasants, no. But the chickens cluck, the sheep wander, the shutters creak. A tiny world suspended in time, like a snow globe with a heartbeat. Visitors still came, even during the Reign of Terror. They tiptoed through the gardens, peeked inside the fake dairy. Some laughed, some frowned, some just stood there, baffled. You had designed it as a retreat, but now it becomes something stranger, a relic, a museum of escapism, a monument to the awkward collision of power and play. Quirky tidbit time, the Hamlet goats, pure white, perfectly brushed and decked out in ribbons. Not because goats care about fashion, but because you did. Rumor has it they had names like Blanchette and Mignonette. Somewhere, there's probably a satirical poem about it. Somewhere else, a noblewoman is still mad she wasn't invited to feed them. Historians still argue whether the Hamlet was satire, sincerity, or self-delusion. Was it your misguided attempt to connect with the people, or was it just for you, a pretty diorama to shelter you from reality? Whatever the answer, the villagers never forgot it. To them, it was proof that their queen had no idea how the world worked. While they queued for bread, you were playing milkmaid in a silk corset. No wonder they sharpened their pitchforks. But the full truth, as always, is messier. Because the Hamlet wasn't just a stage set. You didn't allow visitors. You didn't hold grand parties there. In fact, it was oddly private, quiet. You'd go there with only your closest companions, your children, a few ladies in waiting. You weren't showing off, you were hiding, which makes it feel less like arrogance and more like loneliness. Back at Versailles, your rooms are stripped, portraits taken down, dresses auctioned, servants scattered. The queen's bedchamber stands empty, the embroidered silks collecting dust. A few brave looters pry open drawers, searching for treasures. They don't find much, just scraps, fragments, hints of a life that now feels like a rumor. But the Hamlet remains stubbornly intact. The cottage you loved most, the Maison de la Reine, still leans slightly to the left, its walls damp with age. The little footbridge you used to cross, still there, probably missing a plank. The pond glistens in the morning sun, same as it ever did. Even the dovecot, where your pigeons once cooed and fluttered, sits quietly, waiting. A revolution may tear down palaces, but it tends to forget the fake farms. Somehow, that's poetic. Your daughter, Marie-Thérèse, survives. She endures prison, illness, isolation. She loses her father, her mother, her brother, her aunt. She watches the walls close in, but she lives. Barely. Eventually, she's released in a prisoner exchange. She leaves France with ghosts stitched into every inch of her skin, and she remembers the Hamlet. Later in life, she tells stories about it. Soft ones. Of spring flowers and warm goats. Of your voice calling her in for dinner. She remembers your laugh echoing across the pond. She says it's the only place she ever saw you happy, and for a moment it's as if you aren't dead. You're just out there, picking herbs, brushing crumbs from your apron, humming a tune no one else knows. People begin to talk about you again. But not the real you, a version of you. Marie Antoinette, the symbol. Marie Antoinette, the tragedy, the icon, the villain, the girl who said, "Let them eat cake," even though you didn't. The queen who danced while her country starved, even though you cried yourself to sleep. Your Hamlet becomes part of the myth too. Some say it was your downfall. Others say it was your sanctuary. And a few, just a quiet, select few, say it was your masterpiece. The fantasy you built brick by brick, not to impress the world, but to protect yourself from it. You weren't the first ruler to escape into make-believe. You won't be the last. But yours was different. More fragile, more sincere, more childlike. A place where reality bent and softened, where everything was curated and controlled. And when the real world finally crashed through the gates, it wasn't the Hamlet that failed. It was the dream that anyone could ever live untouched by the storm. Still the flowers bloom there every spring. Still the bees hum lazily in the garden. Still the sun slants just so through the cottage windows. As if time itself is trying to protect the illusion a little longer. But your Hamlet lives on, tucked into the trees at the edge of the Versailles gardens like a secret someone forgot to tell. It waits in stillness, like a held breath. After the revolution, Versailles becomes a monument to the fall of monarchy. Looted, vandalized, cold. The Hall of Mirrors echoes with footsteps that no longer belong to kings. But the Hamlet? It sits largely untouched, too odd to be offensive, too charming to destroy. Even angry mobs can't muster the energy to burn down a play farm with sheep and bows. Mainstream historical fact, Napoleon himself orders parts of Versailles restored, and the Hamlet is included, not out of affection for you, but because he sees value in nostalgia. That's the thing with fantasy architecture. It's hard to kill. It lingers, even when the queen is headless. Over time, the Hamlet becomes a curiosity. The paint peels, roofs sag, but the bones hold. Tourists arrive, centuries later, expecting Versailles-level grandeur, and instead finding a little cluster of houses that look straight out of a fairy tale, if fairy tales came with hay rakes and questionable plumbing. You walk through it, now as a ghost. No one sees you. Not the guides pointing out the milking shed, not the school children shuffling across the wooden bridges, not the couple taking selfies with the tower in the background, But you're there, always. You pause in front of the dairy. The blue and white tiles are faded now. The marble table's cracked. But the air smells the same, like stone and cream and something just a little too sweet. You remember setting jugs there, arranging strawberries just so. You remember laughter. Yours, your friends, your daughters. They said you built this place to mock the poor. But what if you built it to remember being young? Here's a quirky tidbit. One of your favorite rooms in the Hamlet was a fishery parlor. That's right, you had a fancy little lounge built just for admiring freshwater fish. Not catching them, not eating them, just looking. A kind of watery salon. Historians still debate whether this was peak decadence or just charming eccentricity. Either way, your carp had better digs than most Parisians. The debate about the Hamlet never ends. Was it an insult? A fairyland? A harmless coping mechanism for a queen suffocating under pressure? Historians still argue whether the Hamlet proves your detachment or your desperation. But let's talk about detachment, shall we? Because the truth is, Versailles itself was already a bubble, a world apart. And you were a foreign teenager dropped into that pressure cooker, expected to perform perfection under surveillance from every angle. You danced when told, smiled when told, bowed when told, birthed heirs when told. The Hamlet wasn't detachment from reality. It was rebellion. Your way of saying, this is mine, this tiny, absurd world, it's mine. In the fishery, you could breathe. In the tower, you could be alone. In the dairy, you could pretend there weren't pamphlets printing lies about your body, your spending, your loyalties. It wasn't real, but it was yours. The path winds around to the mill. A water wheel still turns, decorative, not functional. You used to sit by it with your embroidery, though you rarely finished a piece. Too restless. Too much always going on in your head. Court etiquette. Your children's coughs. The distant boom of unrest you were only just beginning to understand. And now, the mill is empty, save for spiders and echoes. Tourists pass through, barely slowing. No one sees the ghost at the window. It's easy to laugh at the Hamlet, easy to mock it as a royal fever dream. But sometimes, when the light hits just right and the wind carries the scent of clover, you wonder if maybe it's doing exactly what it was meant to do. Out here, the past softens. Memory curls like smoke. Your daughter would have agreed. She spent her childhood running barefoot along these paths, feeding the goats, watching the frogs. It was the only place she felt safe, she later said. The only place she remembers you smiling with your whole face. And maybe that's the secret. The Hamlet didn't save your reign. It didn't protect you from the blade. But it gave your children a flicker of normal. And for one short chapter, it gave you back your breath. You passed the gardener's cottage, the one with the curved staircase and the tiny walled garden. You used to sneak in at sunrise, trailing dew across the floor. You'd pick herbs you didn't know how to cook with, just to feel like you could. You'd press your hands into the warm soil and marvel that the earth didn't care who you were. No courtiers, no wigs, just dirt. It's not a palace, but it was your home. Well, one of them. And the funny thing about homes is that they don't stop existing when the people inside them disappear. They go on, they echo, they remember. Somewhere behind you a door creaks open in the cottage. The wind shifts, the lilies nod, the brook whispers against the stones. And in that moment, the Hamlet isn't fake. It's eternal. Build something fake. Sometimes people believe in it more than the real thing. The Hamlet, your little milkmaid daydream, was meant to be an escape, a diversion, a beautiful lie. But over the years it becomes something stranger, a memory people can walk through, a version of you they can still visit. Time, you find, is surprisingly forgiving. After the Revolution, after Napoleon, after 100 shifting governments, Versailles slowly morphs from royal residence to national treasure. Restoration comes in pieces. Funding arrives in fits and starts. But the Hamlet, it's like a stubborn weed. It clings, it endures, it gets repaired, repainted, tidied up. Mainstream historical fact, in the 19th century, Empress Eugenie, wife of Napoleon III, becomes fascinated with you. She has the Hamlet restored as a tribute, lovingly reimagining your taste. She even hosts a costume ball there, dressed like you, fluttering through the gardens in a replica gown. You, watching all this from the beyond, probably want to roll your eyes. But you don't. You've grown soft. Centuries do that. The Hamlet slowly becomes a museum of you. Not you, The idea of you, the wistful, misunderstood queen, the delicate, tragic figure with curls and wide eyes and flowers tucked in your hair. They forget the sarcasm, the mistakes, the boredom. They remember the lace, the ribbons, the chickens. Quirky tidbit? At one point, restorers tried to reintroduce the exact breeds of animals you kept. This included a type of sheep so rare and so ridiculously fluffy that people thought it was a hoax. Imagine a cloud on legs. That's what your sheep look like. Completely impractical, but deeply aesthetic. Historians still argue whether this preservation is respectful homage or just historical cosplay. Was the Empress honoring your memory or playing dress up with the past? Does it matter? The Hamlet is alive again. The shutters open, the gardens bloom. Children chase butterflies over the bridge you once crossed in clogs. And even if they don't know your name, they feel something here. And that, perhaps, is the quiet victory. You didn't leave behind a political legacy. Not really. You left behind something more fragile, a place. You walk past the dovecote where the birds coo softly, just as they did when you were alive. You remember once holding a dove in your palm, surprised by how light it was. You'd expected more weight, but it sat like a breath in your hand. That's what the Hamlet feels like now. A breath. A pause in history's long exhale. The royal family is long gone. France is a republic. You're more wax figure than monarch. But this place, this little stitched-together fantasy, still pulses with something that feels like memory. You cross the bridge again. The planks groan beneath your ghostly feet. The wind lifts your hair, or maybe it's just your imagination. Out here, the line between real and not real was always blurry. Visitors don't always understand what they're seeing. They expect Versailles, gold, marble, chandeliers, but instead they find laundry lines and cabbages. And when they read that you, the doomed queen, built this on purpose, they tilt their heads. They reconsider. Because if you were just a spoiled aristocrat, why build a fake village with no ballroom? Why surround yourself with mud and milk? Why choose quiet over grandeur? Of course, it's more complicated than that. The Hamlet was never meant to solve your problems. It was never going to change the tide of revolution or save your reputation. But it gave you moments, little slices of life where you weren't being watched, judged, mocked. You were just being. And now the Hamlet offers that same thing to everyone else. A pause. A softness. School kids eat sandwiches on the grass. Couples hold hands by the pond. A painter sets up her easel and tries to capture the way the light hits the thatched roofs. They don't know you're watching, but you are. You float past the laundry cottage where once your ladies-in-waiting tried to scrub linens without chipping their manicures. They weren't very good at it, but you laughed. And for a few hours no one had to curtsy. They said you were pretending to be poor. But you weren't pretending. You were pretending to be free. It's not the same thing. Now let's be honest. This whole setup was still wildly out of touch. Real peasants didn't wear embroidered aprons. They didn't milk cows in perfume. They didn't have a private harpist hiding in the next room in case they wanted a little mood music while kneading bread. But still, something in it was real. Maybe not the farming, but the need for quiet, the need for connection, the need to step out of the endless swirl of power and performance and just exist. The Hamlet gave you that, and now it gives it to others. You hear a child laughing in the distance and it stops you. Just for a moment, that sound, that burst of joy, it sounds like your son, the little one, the one who didn't make it, and suddenly it's all there again. His hands in the fountain, his curls caught in the wind, his laughter echoing through the tower. The Hamlet remembers. The world moved on. Paris rebuilt. Crowds gathered elsewhere. The palace became a postcard. But here, the air still carries your name, Marie Antoinette, the queen who built a fake village, and maybe, just maybe, the most honest thing you ever did. The road curves past the orchard, where tiny pears hang like green teardrops, and the air smells like sap and soil. You drift slower here. This was always the quietest part of the Hamlet, the furthest from the palace, furthest from expectation. The kind of place where the bees do the talking, and even the frogs feel like they're whispering. You like this spot. You'd wander here in early morning when mists still clung to the grass and your guards hadn't quite woken up. You'd pick fruit that wasn't ripe yet, just to feel the weight of it in your palm, just to remind yourself that things grow even when no one watches. Mainstream historical fact. By the late 1700s, French aristocracy was obsessed with nature, but not real nature. It had to be curated, controlled. Landscaped English-style gardens replaced the rigid, geometric French designs. You followed that trend with your Hamlet, natural, but still trimmed with intention. That wild-looking grove over there? Planted by order. That ruined wall? Built from scratch. Your version of rustic charm came with blueprints and invoices. The orchard wasn't just for ambiance, though. You had it stocked with real trees, producing real fruit. The goal wasn't farming exactly. It was atmosphere. An immersive, edible set piece. A stage of simplicity, some critics called it. Historians still argue whether you were naive enough to believe this performance of peasantry, or savvy enough to know it was all theater. You stop by one of the trees, placing your translucent hand near the bark. For a second, you imagine you can still feel the ridges of it under your fingers. The realest things in the Hamlet were always the ones no one noticed. Behind the orchard sits the Queen's house, your private retreat at the Hamlet's heart. A simple name, sure, but the building itself was far from modest. 2 stories, connected by an outdoor staircase. Tall windows that looked over the lake. Inside, you had a salon with elegant boiserie walls, hand-painted panels, and just enough furniture to say casual luxury without screaming it. But here's the quirky tidbit. One of the upstairs rooms was painted to look like it had wooden paneling, when in fact it didn't. Faux rustic. Fake wood. You see the irony. Layers on layers, like frosting on a cake. Even your illusions had illusions. You spent real hours here. Reading, writing letters, playing with your children when they were small enough to need no explanations. And unlike the rest of Versailles, here you weren't watched constantly. No one burst through these doors to report that your corset was a half-inch too loose or that a duchess had been offended by your choice of ribbon color. Here, you could nap. Naps are an underrated royal luxury. You float inside, the room's bare now, but the air still thick with memory. You see yourself, legs tucked up under you on a chaise, a book in your lap, and a slice of peach on a porcelain plate. You see your daughter giggling in the corner, trying to braid the tail of a very patient cat. You see a moment where no one was rehearsing for anything. That, more than anything, is what the Hamlet gave you. Unrehearsed life. Outside, the lake ripples. Swans glide by like they own the place, and in a way they do. Generations of them have lived here, undisturbed by revolutions, restorations, or selfies. You remember feeding them bits of bread, laughing when one of your friends squealed at a nipping beak. You named them, gave them personalities, swore one of them had a secret crush on your harpist. Not everything in the Hamlet was staged. Some of it was just human, just yours, and maybe that's why it lasts. Because while the palace was always a mirror, polished, dazzling, cold, the Hamlet was a painting. Soft edges, interpretive, open to imagination. You could be anyone here, a farmer, a mother, a ghost. You step back outside, tracing the path toward the Marlborough Tower, that slender lighthouse-shaped structure at the lake's edge. It never had much function, just a picturesque perch. But you loved it. You liked the view. You liked how it made the Hamlet feel like a tiny country all its own, with you as its queen, not of France, but of something quieter. Historians still debate whether you ever truly understood how your people suffered, whether the Hamlet was innocent escapism or a galling display of ignorance. And sure, it probably depends on the day. You weren't stupid, but you were overwhelmed. And here, you could shrink the world to the size of a garden path, and you weren't alone. Your closest companions, your ladies and confidantes loved this place too. Not just for the novelty, but for the relief. Versailles was all surveillance and spite. Here they could breathe. They could laugh without fear it'd be quoted in a pamphlet. They could play pretend without consequence. Well, almost. Because even the Hamlet, as charming and cozy as it was, couldn't keep the world out forever. But that's another section, isn't it? For now, you rest your weightless self on the edge of the stone bridge. Your reflection doesn't show in the water, but if it did, you'd probably still have perfect hair. Ghost perks. The air cools. Evening presses in. A family walks by, their little girl pointing at the thatched roof of the dairy and asking if a princess lives there. Her father chuckles and says, "Kind of." You smile. Not the answer you'd have given. But not wrong either. The Hamlet doesn't need to be real. It just needs to be remembered. You wander back toward the lake, where reeds rustle and the water mirrors the dusky pink of the sky. Evening in the Hamlet was always your favorite. The light softened the corners of everything. Even the buildings, so carefully weathered to look accidental, took on the hush of a secret. But you don't have it to yourself anymore. A group of tourists rounds the corner. Cameras bounce on their chests. One of them points up at the Queen's house, squinting. Did she really live here, he asks. You want to answer. To say, no, not live, not like that. Not the way you're imagining. But I was here. I needed this place. You don't, though. You just hover near the path and listen. Mainstream historical fact, even during your life, the Hamlet drew mixed reactions. When news of it leaked beyond Versailles, critics were ruthless. Pamphleteers dubbed it the Queen's Folly. They painted you as a heartless narcissist who played at being poor while your people starved. Some even accused you of building it as a sex resort, which honestly says more about them than you. Of course, it was all ridiculous. You weren't lounging in hay bales seducing shepherds. The Hamlet had rules, structure. It was your sanctuary, not your scandal. But public opinion didn't care about nuance. Quirky tidbit? Rumors swirled that you demanded your cows be washed and perfumed daily before you'd go near them. Modern historians doubt that one. Cows aren't known for their flexibility with spa treatments, but the image stuck. Another symbol of your supposed detachment from reality. The truth? You probably liked clean cows. Who doesn't? Historians still argue whether the backlash to the Hamlet was the turning point in your downfall. Not the diamond necklace, not the overspending, but this little fairy tale village that made people furious. And that's the strange thing, isn't it? You didn't throw lavish parties here. You didn't bankrupt the treasury on this place. In fact, the Hamlet cost a fraction of Versailles' annual maintenance. But it looked offensive, because it blurred the lines too much. It made the elite look ridiculous. Like children playing house while the adults outside were dying of hunger. You didn't mean it that way. But public imagination ran wild, and the pamphlets, those scathing, hilarious, utterly ruthless pamphlets, they weaponized it. They drew caricatures of you in shepherdess garb, seducing ministers in haylofts. They described your daily life in the Hamlet as a grotesque joke. Queen Marie, pretending to churn butter with diamond rings on. You found some of them amusing at first. You even joked about framing one. But the laughter died when the crowd stopped being curious and started being angry. You walked down the path to the dairy, the true centerpiece of all this mock peasantry. This is where you'd bring guests, dignitaries, even your husband if he could be coaxed out of his forge. It was the showstopper. All marble basins, gilded cream jugs, and mythological carvings of nymphs offering milk. Because when you think of cows, obviously you think of nymphs. The irony is sharp now, but back then, it felt natural. Beauty was everywhere at court. Why not in your cheese cellar? Inside the dairy, there's a kind of hush. Tourists don't linger here long. They peek in, maybe take a photo, and move on. But if they stayed longer, they'd feel it too, that ache in the marble, the silence of a room that was always meant to impress and somehow never quite did. You glance at the walls, still cool to the touch, even now. You remember trailing your fingers across them, idly, during a long conversation with your friend, the Princesse de Lamballe. She had a laugh like wind chimes. You miss her terribly. You both agreed this place made you feel suspended, like the world couldn't reach you here. But of course it could, because the Hamlet wasn't a secret. People knew. They always knew. The moment someone sees a queen pretending to be a milkmaid, the image never leaves them. It becomes the punchline to every sermon, the centerpiece of every angry speech. The Hamlet was your attempt to find peace, and instead, it became your most visible sin. Still, you kept coming. Even after the whispers turned to roars, even after the court shrank and the palace darkened, you kept returning, even when it became clear that your kingdom was slipping away. Because this place mattered, not politically, not economically, but personally. And you, despite what they said, were still a person. Sometimes that gets forgotten. But here, in the gardens you planted, on the paths you walked barefoot, in the shadows of the buildings you insisted be both humble and beautiful, you exist. Not as the villain, not even as the victim, but as the human. The one who tried to create something soft in a hard world, who wanted to slow down a clock that was already racing toward disaster, who knew, somewhere deep down, that the revolution couldn't be stopped, but maybe, just maybe, she could hide from it a little longer. You turn back toward the lake. Another couple walks by. They stop to take a photo of the Marlborough Tower, and the woman smiles. "It looks like something out of a storybook," she says. Her partner nods. Crazy that it was real. You float past them, invisible but oddly proud. It was real, and it still is, even if no one believes it. Back along the winding stream that cuts through the hamlet like a lazy silver ribbon. It sparkles under the last of the day's light, catching flickers of movement. Carp, maybe, or just the illusion of them. You bend down, trying to glimpse what's beneath the surface, but there's only murky shimmer like memory, deep, familiar, and just out of reach. You used to sit here for hours. Just sit. That's a radical act when you're a queen, doing nothing. Not performing, not deciding, not bowing or being bowed to. Just existing. Breathing. Watching dragonflies skim the surface and asking yourself whether this quiet might last forever. It didn't, of course. You know that now, but at the time, the stillness convinced you. Mainstream historical fact. By the mid-1780s, your popularity had completely unraveled. The affair of the diamond necklace had poisoned public perception beyond recovery, even though you'd had nothing to do with it. You were framed by implication, punished by association, and publicly mocked as if you designed the necklace yourself. The trial cleared you in legal terms, but in the court of public opinion, it was a conviction. The Hamlet, once your retreat, became your refuge. Quirky tidbit: some believed you were building escape tunnels beneath the Hamlet. Others thought you'd hidden gold here, secreted in the cellars of the dairy. No evidence of either has ever been found, but the rumors say more about the people than about you. In times of chaos, even innocence looks suspicious. Historians still argue whether you understood how badly your image had deteriorated. Some say you were aware but helpless, like a swimmer spotting a waterfall too late. Others believe you truly didn't grasp the depth of rage gathering against you. That the Hamlet shielded your understanding, made you believe you were still loved, or at least safe. You rise from the stream and walk the trail that winds toward the working farm buildings, the granges as they were called. Not mock-ups, real structures. Real grain was milled here, real dairy was churned, real workers were paid to act like peasants and do actual peasant work. And no, they weren't dressed in rags or barefoot. They wore clean, damp, modest clothing and did respectable labor in a highly stylized environment. It was, in a sense, performance art, long before anyone called it that. One of your favorite spots was the barn, not because you needed hay, but because it smelled alive. Dusty, warm, and sweet, the scent of work, but not the crushing kind. You always associated it with breathing room. When the palace walls closed in, this was where you could inhale. Back then, you brought your children here. You wanted them to understand something about simplicity, even if it was a curated kind. You let them feed the chickens, gather eggs, chase the sheep, which hated it. You remember your son laughing as a goat tried to chew on his sleeve. For a moment, he forgot he was Dolphin. He was just a boy with goat slobber on his cuff. You wanted that kind of freedom for them. Not freedom from responsibility, just freedom from the expectations that haunted you since you were 14 and told to stop being Austrian and start being French. Was it naive? Maybe. Probably. But it came from a place of aching. People often forget that you were homesick for most of your life. You missed Vienna's green spaces, your dog's schnapps, your sister's gossip, the less rigid rhythm of your childhood. Versailles was all performance, every moment scripted, even your wake-up time. The Hamlet was the first place you got to write your own script. And what you wrote was gentleness. The buildings, the farm, the lake, it wasn't just for show. It was an attempt to anchor yourself in a world that was already unraveling. A world where you were blamed for everything from war debt to hailstorms. People said you said let 'em eat cake. You didn't. But once a lie is sweet enough, it sticks. You stand outside the sheepfold now, looking over the empty pen. Once there were lambs here, bright-eyed and wobble-legged. Your daughter used to name them all, only to forget who was who by the end of the week. There was one she insisted was a princess, and you went along with it, tucking a ribbon around its neck and calling it her woolliness. That's what the pamphlets never captured: the softness, the jokes, the regular days. To them, the Hamlet was absurd, a queen playing dress up while people rioted. And yes, the contrast was staggering. But they never saw the tiny moments, the real, human ones that filled this place like perfume. A boy laughing with a goat, a mother watching her children chase ducks, a woman so desperately trying to hold something together with lace and timber and thyme. You walk back toward the Queen's house, the sky now dipped in lavender and gold. A breeze stirs the grass, fireflies blink to life like tiny lanterns. Somewhere far away, a bell rings. You pause. For a second, everything aligns again: the light, the scent, the silence. It's like stepping into a painting you once loved. And maybe that's what the Hamlet always was. Not a place, for peace, for beauty, for just one moment untouched by fear. You drift along the path from the Queen's house to the edge of the Hamlet, where the trees grow taller and the undergrowth thickens just enough to feel like you're trespassing into the wild. But you aren't. Even the forest here was curated. Nothing in your Hamlet was ever truly accidental, and yet it all feels so natural now. A soft rustle in the bushes to your left, probably a rabbit, or maybe just the breeze shifting leaves. You pause anyway. This spot, shaded and quiet, is where the world began to press in, because the Hamlet didn't exist in a vacuum. It sat in the middle of a crumbling empire. Mainstream historical fact: by the late 1780s, France was in a full-blown financial crisis. The treasury was dry, food prices were soaring, and bread riots had become a daily reality. The revolution hadn't officially begun, but the fuse was burning fast. Meanwhile, you were still here, milking staged cows in a designer bonnet while your husband tinkered with locks in his workshop. To the public, you weren't a person anymore. You were a symbol, the Autrichienne, the foreign queen, the one who ruined France. And the Hamlet, it was painted as proof. Proof that you didn't care. Proof that you were laughing while Paris burned. That you played at being poor but didn't understand poverty. That you'd rather build a fantasy than fix reality. Historians still argue whether that image was crafted purely by propaganda or if your own detachment made it easier to believe. Was it malicious myth-making? Or were you really that oblivious? You lean against a tree now, fingers brushing its rough bark. The cool texture is grounding. You always felt calmer in the Hamlet's wooded edges, where birdsong masked the echoes of court gossip, because the whispers did follow you here. Even among friends, you could feel it, the hesitation. Advisors became careful with their words. Ladies-in-waiting exchanged glances when you spoke too brightly. And the Queen's garden, once a safe haven, began to feel like a stage. You started wearing simpler gowns, hoping the gesture would matter. You even made changes at court, cut costs, dismissed a few extravagances, donated more. But no one wanted to see the Queen moderate. They wanted her gone. And while the revolution hadn't yet arrived at your gates, its shadows had already crept into your sleep. Quirky tidbit? You once joked that the Hamlet should get its own guard. Just a single soldier with a polite voice and a nice smile, to ask rioters to please schedule their torches for another day. It was your way of coping, of laughing through the fear. Gallows humor, before the gallows came for real. You move now past the mill, its wheels still, moss creeping along the base. It was never a working mill, just decorative, picturesque, a postcard before postcards existed. That's the part people hated the most, the inauthenticity. But you didn't build it to deceive, you built it to dream. And dreams, by definition, aren't practical. Still, you can't help but wonder, if you'd built a hospital instead, if you'd opened the Hamlet to the public, if you'd invited Parisians to walk its paths and see the softer side of their queen, would it have made a difference? Historians disagree. Some say it was too late, no matter what you did, that the anger ran deeper than any gesture could mend. Others argue the Hamlet was a misstep, a tone-deaf attempt to play at being of the people when you'd never lived a day as one of them. But what they often miss is how trapped you felt. The palace was a cage. The court was a performance. Even your pregnancies were public events. And here, just here, you had a sliver of something else. So maybe it was selfish. Maybe the Hamlet wasn't about France at all. Maybe it was about you, clinging to beauty as the world turned ugly. You walk the narrow trail that leads to the Temple of Love, perched on the far edge of the estate like a delicate whisper. It's a small rotunda, all white marble and soft curves. You remember standing there in silence, watching the statue of Cupid and thinking, do people still believe in any of this? Now, the temple sits as it did then, silent, cold, too elegant to ever be mistaken for something real. You step inside. The echo of your footfalls is gentle, like a conversation with yourself. You used to come here when your thoughts were too loud. The irony was sharp. A temple built to celebrate love, visited by a queen who was, at that point, terribly lonely. Because your marriage, well, that's its own tangled thread. You cared for Louis, you did, but he wasn't a partner in the way you needed. He was kind but distant, intelligent but awkward, and the intimacy never really bloomed. He didn't come to the Hamlet often. He never hated it, but it wasn't his world. He preferred his forge, his maps, his books. He let you have your village, and you let him have his tools. You each had your escapes. Yours just came with sheep. You lean against the marble now, cheek pressed to its cool surface. You close your eyes. You imagine the sounds of children laughing somewhere in the background. You imagine the world is still whole. And for a moment, it is. Evening cool has deepened into something quieter now, a hush that settles over the hamlet like velvet. You linger near the temple of love, watching mist begin to form on the lake in the distance. It clings to the grass in low, thin layers, like the world is exhaling slowly, trying to remember how to rest. But you can't rest. Not here. Not really. Not anymore. You begin walking back toward the heart of the hamlet, your steps heavier than before. The pebbled paths crunch beneath your feet, familiar but no longer comforting. Somewhere between the hedgerows and the rose gardens, the memory comes flooding back, the day the mob finally reached Versailles. Mainstream historical fact. On October 5th, 1789, thousands of women, market women, fishmongers' mothers, marched from Paris to Versailles, angry, desperate, and soaked through by hours of rain. They were hungry. Their children were hungry. They weren't carrying signs. They were carrying knives, pitchforks, muskets. What started as a protest about bread ended as the moment the monarchy collapsed in on itself. They weren't just coming for the king. They were coming for you. You didn't sleep that night. You waited. In a palace too large to hide in, with guards too few to hold the line, you sat by your children's beds and listened to the sound of approaching footsteps, wondering whether tonight would be your last. Quirky tidbit? Even that night, you tried to remain composed. When your ladies-in-waiting urged you to flee, you refused at first, still dressed in your nightgown. "Let me die at my post," you said. It sounds theatrical now, but in the moment, it was all too real. You weren't trying to be brave. You just didn't know where else to go. The rioters broke in before dawn. They stormed the palace corridors, killed 2 guards, and shouted for your blood. You escaped through a hidden passage. It was no fairy tale. It wasn't even a nightmare. It was something worse, because it was real. Historians still argue whether that was the moment your fate was sealed. Some say you could have fled, regrouped, sought asylum. Others think you were already too entangled in the monarchy's failures to ever be anything but a scapegoat. You left Versailles that morning. You left the hamlet too, and you never came back. The hamlet didn't die that day, but it emptied. The gardens overgrew. The stream grew cloudy. The sheep were taken elsewhere. And you were taken to Paris. Not as a queen, but as a prisoner. You passed the queen's house again now, half expecting to see the glow of candlelight inside. But it's empty, its windows dark like tired eyes. You used to sit in the upstairs salon with your embroidery hoop, pretending not to overhear the gossip floating in from the kitchen. You'd smile softly to yourself at how different the world felt here, how much smaller and safer and slower it was. It's strange how even fake villages can feel more real than palaces. You keep walking, past the dovecote, past the potager gardens that once bloomed with carrots and cabbages and medicinal herbs. You remember planting mint here once, only for it to take over the entire corner bed like a fragrant little revolution of its own. You laughed then, said the mint was you, foreign, persistent, underestimated. Now it just smells sharp, like memory, and memory unfortunately doesn't forget. You think about your children, Marie-Thérèse, always so serious, stronger than you maybe, Louis Charles, soft-voiced and wide-eyed, taken from you too soon. You tried to shield them. That's what this hamlet was supposed to be, a barrier between them and the ugliness waiting outside the palace gates. You wanted them to know joy, even if the joy was rehearsed. You thought you had more time. You didn't. The revolution moved faster than anyone expected, faster than you could run. You can still hear the crowd screaming outside the Tuileries, the sound of fists against carriage wood, the stink of sweat and unwashed bodies pressing in on all sides. You'd seen paintings of revolutions before, but no one paints the smell, or the fear, or how your daughter clung to you with small shaking hands, whispering that she didn't want to die. There are no portraits of that, only shadows. You reach the edge of the hamlet now, where the buildings give way to open meadow. The grass is tall. The wind moves through it like a ghost, parting the blades in waves that mimic the sea. You stand still. The hamlet is behind you now, silent, beautiful, broken. You once thought you could live out your life here, tucked inside your own private painting. No politics, no court, just milk pails and lilies. But the world came knocking anyway, and this time it didn't knock. It kicked the door in, gently rippling like a half-remembered lullaby. The sun has slipped entirely behind the horizon now, leaving a pale band of lavender across the sky. That kind of color always made you pause, as if the day was sighing, one last breath before the dark settled in completely. You step into the grass, letting the stalks brush against your legs. It's taller than you remember, or maybe you've just grown smaller in the years since. Beyond this field lies the forest's edge, and beyond that, Paris, and all that came after. Mainstream historical fact. By 1791, the monarchy was crumbling in slow motion. Your family was confined to the Tuileries Palace, watched day and night while revolutionaries debated whether France should even have a king anymore. Louis hesitated. You did not. You knew what was coming. You tried to act. That's when you planned the escape. The flight to Varennes. You remember the details all too clearly, because for a brief flicker of time, it felt like you might actually get away. Like the nightmare might end with freedom after all. You disguised yourself as a governess, your children as girls, your husband as a valet. You left in the dead of night, bouncing along in a heavy carriage, hearts thudding in sync with the horse's hooves. Quirky tidbit? You packed a ridiculous amount of luggage. Dresses, hats, jewelry, your sense of protocol clung to you even in exile. People still laugh about the absurdity of it. That in your bid to flee a collapsing monarchy, you insisted on bringing matching shoes. But it wasn't vanity. It was fear in disguise. A desperate attempt to keep your identity stitched together as everything unraveled. You didn't make it. You were recognized in a small town, just hours from the border. A postal worker spotted the king's face, one he'd seen on coins. That's how your escape ended. Not with gunfire or betrayal, with a glance, with a coin, with history turning on something as small as that. You were marched back to Paris in shame, a royal family now visibly powerless. The public lined the roads, screaming insults, hurling garbage. Your carriage crawled through a gauntlet of rage, and there was nowhere to hide. Not behind lace, not behind protocol, not even behind your children. Historians still argue whether that failure sealed your fate more than any other moment. Whether, had you succeeded, France's monarchy might have limped along a few more years, maybe even decades. Some think exile would have saved you. Others believe no border could have kept the revolution's anger from finding you. You pause in the meadow, staring back toward the hamlet. The rooftops are barely visible now, swallowed by trees and distance. It doesn't feel like yours anymore. It feels like a story you told once. A bedtime fable that ends with someone waking up, not safe, but changed. You kneel in the grass and run your fingers through the soil, earth under your nails. That's something the queen never got to do, not without someone rushing in with a handkerchief. Here, though, you did this often, dug with your bare hands, planted marigolds, pressed seeds into soil like promises. You wanted to feel something real. The palace had mirrors. The hamlet had dirt. And sometimes dirt was the truth you needed. Your children loved this part, the mess of it. Louis Charles would come back to the queen's house with streaks of mud on his cheeks, proudly holding out a handful of worms. You never scolded. You laughed. You held the worms too. Funny how those moments survive, even after the rest fades. You rise again and walk toward a small wooden bench, half swallowed by tall weeds. It creaks beneath your weight. It always did. It was never built well, too narrow, a little tilted, and yet it held you through so many long thoughts. You remember sitting here just weeks before the March on Versailles, listening to rumors, watching leaves fall, trying to decide whether to write to your mother's old allies for help, whether to beg, whether to run. You didn't know then how much time you had left, or how quickly you'd lose everything. You sit in silence now, letting the night close in around you. Crickets chirp in the brush. An owl calls in the distance. The air is cooler here than at Versailles, less perfumed, more honest. It tastes like moss and stone and endings. You wonder what might have happened if the Hamlet had been public, if you'd invited ordinary citizens to stroll the gardens. See the goats, pick herbs. Maybe they would have seen your heart more clearly, or maybe they would have laughed harder, angrier, at how far removed you were from their lives. That's the ache that never left you, not the fall, but the misunderstanding. The sense that no matter what you did, the people never really saw you. Not the girl with the Austrian accent trying so hard to be French. Not the mother grieving a lost child. Not the woman sitting on a bench in her fake village trying to hold on to something that felt like peace. Just the mask, the caricature, the queen, Madame Deficit, that Austrian, a villain in a story you didn't write. But if you had written it, maybe this meadow would have been the ending. A quiet fade, a bench in the grass, the sound of nightfall, and no need for anything more. After shifts, a small gust lifts your hair gently, stirs the hem of your gown, and rustles the grass like a whisper. For a moment, it almost sounds like a voice, something ancient, or maybe just your own memory humming back to life. You rise from the creaking bench slowly, your knees stiff with the weight of too much time, and begin walking again. There's nowhere specific to go now. You're just following the path where it leads, like you always did. Even when you thought you were in control, you passed the beehives. They're empty, of course, silent. But back then, they hummed. Dozens of golden little bees floating in and out of delicate hives shaped like domes. You liked to watch them, organized, purposeful, unaware of how close their queen lived nearby. Quirky tidbit. You once wrote a note to a lady in waiting saying the bees were your favorite citizens in the Hamlet. Always working, never complaining, loyal. You meant it as a joke, but the irony is sharp now. The bees worked themselves to death, and the queen didn't notice they were dying until the hive was empty. You keep walking. Past the apiary, the Hamlet's boundary grows blurrier. Nature takes over. The neatness fades. Once trimmed hedges now stretch into the sky like they're trying to escape too. And yet, for all its disrepair, the Hamlet still holds its shape, its soul. Like a half-forgotten lullaby you can hum without thinking. But you're not here for memory's sake tonight. You're here because this is where the real you was buried. Not in some crypt or cell, but here, among chickens and roses and staged milkmaids. Because long before they took your crown, before they took your freedom, they took your humanity. They made you a symbol, and symbols are easy to destroy. Mainstream historical fact. By 1792, the monarchy was abolished. France declared itself a republic. Your husband, King Louis XVI, was no longer King of France. He was just Citizen Louis Capet. The revolutionaries put him on trial for treason, and you became the widow Capet. He was executed in January 1793. You weren't allowed to say goodbye privately. They wouldn't even let you wear black. You mourned in silence. In public, you were still watched, still paraded before the people as if your grief was a performance. Historians still argue whether Louis's death was inevitable, whether the court's stubbornness or the king's hesitations made it so, whether he died for his actions or for everything he represented. You never saw his execution, but you heard the cannon fire when it was done. And after that, the cell doors closed tighter. They took your son from you. That was the wound that never healed. Louis Charles, barely 8 years old, dragged from your arms in the middle of the night. They said he had to be re-educated, that the new France would mold him into something better. You screamed, you begged, you fought, but they closed the door anyway. Quirky fact? In the months that followed, they claimed he accused you of abuse, that you committed unnatural acts. Even now, historians debate whether he truly said those things, or whether he was tortured, drugged, coerced. Some say he was just too young to resist. Others believe he didn't say them at all. You didn't defend yourself. Not because it was true, but because by then you'd already lost too much to fight every lie. You walk slowly now past the small lake, its water silver in the moonlight. A single duck glides across the surface, the ripple trailing behind like a silk ribbon. You used to sit here with a book you never read, just letting the quiet do the reading for you. The world was loud then. The Hamlet was your mute button. Now the world is loud again, but this time there's no button to press. You think about what it means to be remembered, not as a queen, but as a person. They remember. Let them eat cake. Words you never said. A myth so sticky it outlived you. A sentence sewn into your legend like a poisoned stitch. They remember your gowns, your hair, your jewels, the gambling, the laughing, the parties. They don't remember how long you sat beside your son's bed while he was sick with a fever. They don't remember how you braided your daughter's hair each night with fingers trembling from grief. They don't remember how scared you were most of the time, and how hard you worked to never show it. You pause near the goat shed. The roof has fallen in now, and the troughs are dry, but you remember the goats well. You named them after court rivals. You milked them with surprising skill. You even joked once that you'd trade your tiara for a shepherd's staff. It wasn't a lie. If you could have disappeared into this Hamlet forever, you might have. But queens don't get to disappear. They get tried. And so you were. Your trial was brutal, short, and already decided before it began. Treason, incest, lavish spending, conspiracy with foreign powers. Every sin they could think of tied into a neat little bow and handed to the executioner. Quirky detail. You wore a white camise to your trial. No jewelry, no adornment. You walked into the courtroom with your spine straight and your eyes unflinching. Even your enemies admitted it. You looked like a queen that day, just not the kind they wanted. The jury deliberated for hours. They came back with the only answer they ever would. Guilty. You were sentenced to die. Woke you before dawn. The prison walls were damp, the air heavy with mildew and silence, like even time itself didn't want to be there. You didn't sleep much that night. No one does when they know what's coming. You spent the hours curled on a wooden bench, knees drawn up, hands shaking but steady enough to pray. Not for yourself, not anymore. For your children, for your daughter, left alone. For your son, wherever he was. When they came for you, they offered no ceremony. Just a rough voice, a knock, and a final command. It was time. Mainstream historical fact. On October 16, 1793, you were executed by guillotine in the Place de la Révolution. You were 37 years old. The same guillotine that had taken your husband would now take you. Just another day's spectacle in a city that had grown addicted to blood and drama. You dressed in white, a plain chemise, simple, unadorned, no wig, no powdered face. Just you, as you truly were. That morning, your jailers hacked off your hair so the blade would fall clean. They tied your hands behind your back and led you out, not in a covered carriage like your husband, but in an open cart meant for criminals. You sat on a hard wooden plank, jostling through the Paris streets while the crowd jeered, whistled, laughed, and yet you didn't flinch. Even your enemies wrote later that your bearing was regal, that you looked straight ahead, unblinking, proud, not detached but defiant. Quirky tidbit? As you stepped toward the guillotine, you accidentally trod on the foot of Charles-Henri Sanson, the executioner. You turned and said, "Pardon me, sir, I did not do it on purpose." Those were your last words. Not some flowery quote, not a curse, just the careful apology of a woman raised in a palace, still saying "excuse me" even at the scaffold's edge. They tied you to the plank, slid you into position, and just like that, it was over. Historians still argue what was felt in that moment. Relief? Justice? Regret? Some say the crowd quieted after your death, sobered by the image of a queen so calmly accepting her fate. Others say they cheered that the revolution had swallowed its final enemy and now could rest. But that wasn't the end of your story. Only the end of your body. Your legacy, the real you, lived on in whispers, in letters, in the Hamlet. Yes, even that strange, artificial village they once mocked. You continue walking along the old path now, the moon painting silver on the edges of your shadow. The Hamlet is behind you, but its weight clings to your steps. You head toward the edge of the forest, where a thin footbridge crosses a slow stream. You remember crossing this bridge with your daughter once, arm in arm, tossing pebbles into the water and watching them vanish. You pause now and kneel at the bank. Pick up a small, smooth stone. Turn it in your hand. Let it fall. It lands with barely a splash, just a soft plop swallowed by the dark, like a secret slipping into silence. You rise again and step onto the bridge, boards creaking underfoot. The trees overhead lean in like tall, thin ghosts, their leaves whispering secrets you once tried to forget. The Hamlet wasn't just your fantasy, it was your confession. A place to admit you didn't know how to rule, didn't want to rule, not like they expected you to. You just wanted to be. To exist without scrutiny, to love your children, read your novels, press wildflowers between pages, and wear muslin because, honestly, those corsets were a menace. But queens don't get that kind of life. And so you died. Not in the garden, not in your home, but in a public square, with your hair shorn and your arms bound, in front of thousands who had never seen you before, but who had been taught to hate you. You reach the end of the bridge now, and something catches your eye. A small wooden sign, barely readable through the moss and age. Ferme de Marie Antoinette. The farm of Marie Antoinette. They preserved it. Not all of it, but enough. Enough for people to wander through. Enough for school children to point at the chickens and for tourists to take filtered photos of the mill. Enough for scholars to argue whether the Hamlet was foolish or prophetic, indulgent or misunderstood. Enough for you to walk through tonight. And that's something, because places hold memory. They hold more than fact, they hold feeling. And in this place, you still breathe, not as a symbol, not as a queen, but as someone flawed, someone frightened, someone trying to stitch joy into a life unraveling at the seams. That's what the Hamlet always was, your little rebellion against the palace, your whispered plea to the world, I am still human. And even if history never quite hears it, the stones do. The soil does. The goats might have too. You take one final look back across the meadow where the queen's house stands silhouetted in moonlight. A memory shaped like a dollhouse, empty now, but never truly silent. Because you're here, and so is the truth, even if it's been painted over with whitewash and legend, even if it's cracked and faded, even if they called it fake. You know what it meant. You always did. They woke you before dawn. The prison walls were damp, the air heavy with mildew and silence, like even time itself didn't want to be there. You didn't sleep much that night. No one does when they know what's coming. You spent the hours curled on a wooden bench, knees drawn up, hands shaking but steady enough to pray. Not for yourself, not anymore. For your children, for your daughter, left alone, for your son, wherever he was. When they came for you, they offered no ceremony, just a rough voice, a knock, and a final command. It was time. Mainstream historical fact. On October 16, 1793, you were executed by guillotine in the Place de la Révolution. You were 37 years old. The same guillotine that had taken your husband would now take you. Just another day's spectacle in a city that had grown addicted to blood and drama. You dressed in white, a plain chemise, simple, unadorned, no wig, no powdered face. Just you, as you truly were. That morning, your jailers hacked off your hair so the blade would fall clean. They tied your hands behind your back and led you out, not in a covered carriage like your husband, but in an open cart meant for criminals. You sat on a hard wooden plank, jostling through the Paris streets while the crowd jeered, whistled, laughed, and yet you didn't flinch. Even your enemies wrote later that your bearing was regal, that you looked straight ahead, unblinking, proud, not detached, but defiant. Quirky tidbit? As you stepped toward the guillotine, you accidentally trod on the foot of Charles-Henri Sanson, the executioner. You turned and said, "Pardon me, sir, I did not do it on purpose." Those were your last words. Not some flowery quote, not a curse, just the careful apology of a woman raised in a palace, still saying excuse me even at the scaffold's edge. They tied you to the plank, slid you into position, and just like that, it was over. Historians still argue what was felt in that moment. Relief? Justice? Regret? Some say the crowd quieted after your death, sobered by the image of a queen so calmly accepting her fate. Others say they cheered that the revolution had swallowed its final enemy and now could rest. But that wasn't the end of your story, only the end of your body. Your legacy, the real you, lived on in whispers, in letters, in the Hamlet. Yes, even that strange, artificial village they once mocked. You continue walking along the old path now, the moon painting silver on the edges of your shadow. The hamlet is behind you, but its weight clings to your steps. You head toward the edge of the forest, where a thin footbridge crosses a slow stream. You remember crossing this bridge with your daughter once, arm in arm, tossing pebbles into the water and watching them vanish. You pause now and kneel at the bank. Pick up a small, smooth stone. Turn it in your hand. Let it fall. It lands with barely a splash, just a soft plop swallowed by the dark, like a secret slipping into silence. You rise again and step onto the bridge, boards creaking underfoot. The trees overhead lean in like tall, thin ghosts, their leaves whispering secrets you once tried to forget. The hamlet wasn't just your fantasy. It was your confession. A place to admit you didn't know how to rule, didn't want to rule, not like they expected you to. You just wanted to be. To exist without scrutiny, to love your children, read your novels, press wildflowers between pages, and wear muslin because honestly, those corsets were a menace. But queens don't get that kind of life. And so you died, not in the garden, not in your home, but in a public square with your hair shorn and your arms bound in front of thousands who had never seen you before, but who had been taught to hate you. You reach the end of the bridge now, and something catches your eye. A small wooden sign, barely readable through the moss and age, Ferme de Marie Antoinette, the farm of Marie Antoinette. They preserved it. Not all of it, but enough. Enough for people to wander through. Enough for school children to point at the chickens and for tourists to take filtered photos of the mill. Enough for scholars to argue whether the hamlet was foolish or prophetic, indulgent or misunderstood. Enough for you to walk through tonight. And that's something, because places hold memory. They hold more than fact. They hold feeling. And in this place you still breathe, not as a symbol, not as a queen, but as someone flawed, someone frightened, someone trying to stitch joy into a life unraveling at the seams. That's what the hamlet always was. Your little rebellion against the palace. Your whispered plea to the world, I am still human. And even if history never quite hears it, the stones do. The soil does. The goats might have too. You take one final look back across the meadow where the queen's house stands silhouetted in moonlight, a memory shaped like a dollhouse, empty now, but never truly silent, because you're here. And so is the truth. Even if it's been painted over with whitewash and legend, even if it's cracked and faded, even if they called it fake, you know what it meant. You always did. Word count, after section 22, awaiting, continue. You follow the curve of the stream now, the cool air tugging gently at your sleeves, the breeze threading itself through the low grass like curious fingers. A sleepy owl hoots once from somewhere above, then decides you're not worth the bother and falls silent again. There's that peace again, the kind of quiet you always craved and never truly had. Back at Versailles, silence was impossible. Even when the corridors were empty, they buzzed with secrets. Too many ears, too many whispers, too many people watching for the wrong reasons. Here, though, the silence feels earned, safe. You take a seat on a stump softened by moss, your skirts spreading around you like a faded pool of moonlight. From this spot, you can see the orchard, or what's left of it. Once it bloomed with apples, cherries, and apricots. Courtiers mocked it, of course. What's a queen doing growing fruit? They'd laugh behind lace fans. But you weren't growing fruit. You were growing space, breathing room, a different rhythm. Mainstream historical fact, Marie Antoinette's triune domain, including the hamlet, was gifted to her by Louis XVI in 1774, just after he ascended the throne. It was meant as her private retreat, separate from the rigid protocols of court life, and she made it into something entirely her own, reimagining a rural ideal where life was slower, freer, less poisoned by politics. And sure, it had servants and fences and rules, but within those rules you built a small rebellion. A rebellion not of guns and pamphlets, but of simplicity. You once insisted on unperfumed soap. You rejected the gilded porcelain and demanded wooden bowls. You even kept a diary where you recorded egg counts and goat births, like a farmer rather than a queen. Fringe tidbit. For years, rumors claimed that your milkmaids were actresses, paid to stand around and look rustic while you played dress-up. But records show many were real workers, trained in animal husbandry and dairy farming. The hamlet actually functioned, producing milk, butter, and cheese, and contributing to the menus of the queen's triune household. Historians still argue whether this project was escapism or economic commentary. Was the Hamlet your sanctuary or an insult? Some say it was tone deaf, a queen pretending to be poor while the real poor starved outside her garden gates. Others argue it was your way of pushing back against a world that never allowed you to be real. Here, in linen and straw hats, you could become someone else. Or maybe finally, just yourself. You rise again and drift along the path past the stone bakehouse, its chimney long collapsed. You used to bake bread there with your ladies. Awkwardly, often with too much flour and too little heat. But you laughed, not a courtly titter, but the kind that shakes your ribs. You miss that laugh, the one that wasn't measured. You're near the dovecot now, round, squat, dotted with tiny arched windows once filled with pigeons. Another quiet metaphor. You were always surrounded by birds, but never the kind who let you fly away. Still, you tried. When the Hamlet was in full bloom, you spent hours here each day, feeding animals, reading aloud, pressing flowers, even sketching. You wanted your children to grow up with dirt under their fingernails and fresh air in their lungs. You believed, stubbornly, that a royal life didn't have to be a prison. The irony, of course, is thick enough to spread on toast. Because eventually, it was. By the end, they called you Madam Deficit. They blamed you for France's financial ruin, for famine, for everything. And yes, there were diamonds. There were balls. There were gowns you only wore once and then stuffed into cedar chests. But you weren't the sole cause of a collapsing economy built on generations of mismanagement, wars, and inequality. You were just the easiest face to hate. And isn't that always the way? When systems break, people blame the visible figure. And what's more visible than a queen with sky-high hair and a milkmaid costume? Quirky side note, some of your hairdos were literally taller than your shoulders. One famously included a model ship sailing across waves of powdered curls. You didn't invent the trend, but you owned it. And no one ever lets a trend-setting woman live it down. You stop now near the vegetable garden. The plots are wild now, but once they held lettuces, carrots, radishes, and herbs. You liked the way the rows made sense, even when nothing else did. You used to hum while planting. Sometimes a lullaby from Vienna, sometimes a French folk song you barely understood. Planting something, anything, felt like hope. You smile faintly. There's an odd peace in knowing your little play village outlived your empire. That tourists still photograph your sheep pens while textbooks argue over your legacy. That school children in satin sashes still walk through the Hamlet and ask their teachers, why did a queen want a farm? And that teachers still struggle to answer with a single sentence. Because you were never a single sentence. Not, let them eat cake. Not the Austrian woman. Not the queen of fashion. You were a girl sold into a marriage contract. A young woman under constant scrutiny. A mother, a sister, a friend. And sometimes just a tired soul who wanted to make cheese in peace. The stars are high overhead now, blinking lazily in the deep blue velvet of night. You tilt your head back and look at them. They look the same as they did centuries ago, quiet, cool, indifferent. They watched you rise, watched you fall, and now they watch you walk, barefoot in memory, through the one place you built for yourself. They'll watch when the wind finally erases your footprints, but maybe not tonight. Tonight you're still here, still tending the garden, still chasing ducks, still searching for yourself in the quiet rustle of wheat. Through a grove of birch trees now, those thin, pale trunks standing like ghostly sentinels in the dark. Their bark peels and curls like half-finished letters, forgotten messages from a past too soft to survive. You walk slowly, your fingers grazing their surface, catching on rough patches, lingering where the wood is warm from the afternoon sun still trapped in its memory. Somewhere nearby, a night insect trills. Then another. The hum rises like a lullaby built from wings and tiny legs. Funny how the wild things never judged you. The court did. The pamphlets did. The mob certainly did. But here the frogs and bees just accepted you. Powdered hair, milkmaid bonnet, or wild-eyed in mourning, they didn't care. You emerge now at the edge of the Queen's Temple of Love. Yes, that's what it was actually called. Mainstream historical fact, the Temple of Love was constructed in 1778 at your request, a delicate neoclassical rotunda built on a tiny artificial island. It housed a marble statue of Cupid carving his bow from Hercules' club. That symbolism wasn't lost on you, love triumphing over brute strength. You visited often, usually alone, sometimes with your children. It became a private altar of sorts, a place to think, to hope. Now it's chipped and faded. The statue is worn. Moss creeps up the pillars, but in moonlight it glows. You approach slowly, the dry leaves whispering under your feet. Sit on the stone bench where you used to watch the water shimmer. Here's where you used to write your letters, the ones never sent, to your mother, to your brother, to your unborn children. You wrote of fear, of guilt, of strange dreams where your old governess scolded you for slouching, even in nightmares. You also wrote poetry, though you'd never admit it to anyone. Some of it bad, some of it honest. And once you wrote a verse that began, "If I am only a mirror for others, let me be the one they forget to clean." Not exactly Racine, but it meant something to you. The reflection of others was always the role they gave you. A queen must be the mirror of virtue, of grace, of national pride. But no one ever asked what your own reflection looked like. What you saw when the powder was off and the jewelry stashed away. Fringe tidbit. One of your favorite pastimes at the Trianon was simply watching the sky. You even had a telescope installed for stargazing. Not for astrology, just curiosity. You liked naming the constellations aloud in French, German, and Latin. It made you feel smart and small, a rare combination for someone in a crown. Historians still argue whether you were clever or clueless. Some see a woman manipulated by bad advisors and empty privilege. Others see flashes of political instinct buried beneath a mountain of societal pressure. You once wrote to your mother that appearances are almost everything in this country. And appearances, as it turned out, were the noose they built for you. Still, sitting here, you can almost feel the warmth of your daughter's head on your lap. Marie Thérèse, the only one who survived. You used to call her Mousseline la Sérieuse, Mousseline, the serious one. She was solemn, even as a toddler, watching everything with those big eyes that looked too much like yours in the mirror. You used to braid her hair by the water, tell her stories from Austria, explain the difference between ducks and geese, even when she already knew. You would have given her this place if you could have. A crown? No, but the Hamlet? Yes, because it was real. It wasn't Versailles with its mirrors and its glittering lies. It wasn't the conciergerie with its mold and its silence. It was you. And maybe that's why it was hated so much. Not because it was fake, but because it was honest. You leave the Temple of Love and walk back toward the Queen's house, its chimneys outlined in silver. The shutters are closed now, the windows dark, but you remember how the candlelight once flickered across those panes like dancing secrets. You remember how it smelled of beeswax and lavender, how the floorboards creaked in exactly the same spots every time, how the kettle hissed at the same pitch each morning. The world outside could be collapsing, but in here, you could choose your rhythm, even if it was all an illusion. You step through the front garden again. The roses are mostly wild now, but you spot a few determined blooms clinging to the trellis, red, yellow, that odd pink one you always liked, the one that never quite bloomed fully, as if it had stage fright. There's a stool on the porch. You sit, and for a long while you just breathe. The air is sweet with damp soil and old wood. You can hear the distant lapping of the lake, the wind brushing across the reeds. Somewhere a door creaks, maybe in memory, maybe not. You take off your shoes and curl your toes into the earth, and you let yourself remember, not just the roles, not just the judgments, but the moments in between. A goat sneezing on your gown, a child's sleepy kiss, a song hummed out of tune, and the silly little wish you once whispered into the garden, "Let me grow something real." You did. It just didn't last long. But neither do roses. That doesn't mean they weren't beautiful. 20 it into 100 words, not the wind down. The 300-word wind down will come after this section, as per your instructions. Section 20, long path past the dairy now. Your steps slow, the ground soft underfoot. The stones here have sunken into the earth over time, worn by years and rain and hoofprints. Somewhere in the distance, an owl coos its last sleepy call, handing the sky off to morning. But the light hasn't fully come yet. Just that hush between worlds when shadows stretch and memory breathes. You circle the outer edge of the hamlet. The air is damp, rich with the scent of loam and time. It's strange how everything here still holds its shape, even after all that's been done to forget it. The sheepfold is half caved in, but the beams still reach for one another like old friends. The water wheel doesn't turn anymore, but it leans confidently over the stream, as if daring anyone to call it obsolete. This wasn't just your refuge, it was your resistance. Mainstream historical fact: the Hamlet wasn't simply whimsical. It reflected the shift in Enlightenment values toward a romanticized view of nature. Modeled after Norman rural villages, it was a carefully constructed ideal with input from painter Hubert Robert and architect Richard Meek. Nothing here was random, not even the shape of the window panes. Yet to many it was a scandal. While the revolution brewed, the Queen of France was, to them, dressing up like a milkmaid, sipping herbal tea in a thatched cottage, pretending to suffer. You became a parody, skewered in pamphlets as Madame Deficit, the queen who spent while others starved. Fringe tidbit: one pamphlet mockingly called the Hamlet Versailles sur foin, Versailles on hay. It portrayed you serenading cows while tossing gold coins to pigs. Ridiculous, yes, but powerful. A single cartoon could undo months of diplomacy. Words, especially printed ones, had teeth. And still you came back here. Because while the court called it foolish, here you were allowed to be tired, to be awkward, to not know the right answer, to forget your posture and let your shoes sink into the soil. Even the farmhands, yes, the real ones, respected you more here than the ministers at Versailles. You asked them real questions. You watched. You learned. You weren't pretending to be them. You were trying to understand something they never taught at Schönbrunn or in Paris salons: how to be a person in the middle of a system designed to make you a symbol. Historians still argue whether the Hamlet was a heartfelt escape or just more performative pageantry. Did you really want a simpler life? Or was it just another mask, just more theater? But you know better, because here no one applauded. No orchestra struck up when you arrived, and when the animals got sick, you helped clean the stalls. Hardly a royal stage. You walk now to the last house on the path, the gardener's cottage. The window has shattered long ago, ivy curling through the frame like a shy hand reaching in. You peek through, dust, cobwebs, the outline of an old table. This was where you came when things felt most uncertain. You'd ask the gardener for news, real news, not the gilded lies passed along through court whisperings. He told you when crops were poor, when weather was shifting, when bees had vanished for no known reason. And once, he told you that people were rioting, that they were blaming you. You laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt impossible. You, with your hands in bread dough and your dress stained with goat hair. How could you be the villain? But villains aren't always sharp-jawed and cloaked in shadow. Sometimes they just wear pearls, or don't speak the language well enough, or try too hard to be liked. You pull away from the window and walk back toward the main path. There's a bench beneath an old willow where you used to sit and read. You loved Rousseau. You didn't always understand him, but you liked the sound of his ideas, the romanticism, the belief in returning to nature, in stripping away the artifice of society. You tried to live that belief, but maybe you couldn't shed the artifice fast enough. Not before the mobs came, not before they forced your carriage through the streets, the Hamlet already plundered, the goats scattered, the gardens trampled. They didn't take much, just your name, your voice, your story. But tonight, you've taken it back. Here, in the quiet, where no one's looking. You run your fingers along the bark of the willow, peeling, smooth, curling like old paper. The branches sway above you, slow and heavy, a canopy of green sighs. You sit and you wait, not for rescue, not for judgment, just for peace. And it comes, not loudly, but in the hush of the reeds, the scent of rosemary, the soft press of the bench beneath you. This was never a fake village. It was a true you. And that, maybe, is what frightened them most. You weren't playing dress-up. You were dressing down, letting go, unmaking the queen, becoming Marie. And for one stolen chapter, you succeeded. You built something real. It just happened to look like a dream.